Greetings and welcome to Volume 1 of the Vampire Cop Case Files. Most of you may know the character from the previous 4-hour fantasy horror series that I wrote last year, of him hunting down Dracula, keeping his vampiric secrets from the world, and navigating the vampire life trying to be a human with each passing day. However, these stories shed light on the Vampire Cop's earlier days, or shall I say nights, a time when he had just become Detective Inspector at the Redwater police station, a time that showed just how hard he has worked trying to make a difference in the world. From Skinwalkers and Wendigos to werewolves and scarecrows coming alive, I hope you enjoy these supernatural investigations as the Vampire Cop unravels some of the darkest horror mysteries existing in his world. Episode 1: The Skinwalker Investigation. I remember this case like it was yesterday. That stormy night with heavy raindrops thrashing against my window while I was getting ready for the night shift at the Redwater police station. I've read many books on skinwalkers, spooky tales told around the campfire. I had thought, never would I have expected to encounter one in my city, especially one that powerful. I had just become Detective Inspector in the Redwater police force, which meant my long black coat and hat, my favorite attire, was what I could wear to work every night. I was also thankful the RPF had a night shift. Wouldn't make sense for a vampire to be around the day shift. Though working in the night never stopped the side eyes or the questions regarding my appearance. Why was I so pale? Why did my ears look pointy like an elf? Why did I feel so cold to the touch? Why at times did folks see my eyes glowing in the night? Questions that I answered with excuses. I hate lying, though for the safety of others I had to. Prior to joining the force, I had been a vigilante. I still helped people, but I didn't feel like I made a difference. There was such a huge shift in the way that people now approach me. It's incredible how much trust and safety an inspector emanates, that folk confide in you without even knowing who you are. That was my goal, for people to speak freely and feel comfortable while doing so. On every inspector's desk there was a nameplate as well as the field they specialized in. Detective Laura Mill's nameplate read homicide, for example. Mine read the same with a minor change. I dealt with supernatural cases. Redwater was home to all sorts of supernatural creatures, myself included. Though this was at a time where ordinary human folk never believed it. They couldn't explain the strange occurrences happening around them. I could. I had been alive for 95 years at the time. A long life of collecting information, reading up about lore in books of said creatures, studying them, finding their weaknesses, knowing their strengths, making notes of those who may be good, much like myself, and those who are pure evil. That night, the storm never subsided. I filed in some paperwork at my desk in the police station, getting distracted from the strong winds rattling the doors, while the large raindrops thumped against the window. Good distraction though. I love the gloomy weather, and not just because I could walk in it. Then amidst the storm, a father and his daughter had walked in. He spoke to Miss Ada at the front desk, and I saw her pointing towards me, which meant this was a supernatural report. I didn't realize at the time, maybe it was a reflex, but I always tend to tidy up my desk whenever someone approaches. While I cannot speak for other inspectors, I feel more nervous than the person giving their statement. The man introduced himself as Mr. Elias, but the girl didn't say anything. After a long pause, he introduced his daughter as Lena. He looked distraught, an empty shell of a man with nothing behind his eyes. Then he told me what happened. He mentioned his wife Sophia, 34 years of age, died in her sleep few nights ago. The morgue declared a natural cause of death, though she never had any ailments. She was the village witch, but not the evil kind. The kind that brews potions, creates remedies and ointments to help village folk. People loved her, she helped them, nobody would have wanted to hurt her. So he says. He couldn't accept the fact that she died of natural causes. He felt like it was foul play. Maybe someone poisoned her despite the autopsy reports not showing it. However, this entire time I couldn't help but notice the little girl playing with something in her hand, a sack-like bag of some sort. Still, I maintained the comforting look and posture and listened attentively. I understood why Mr. Elias was so reluctant in his report. If he went to any of the other inspectors, the case would have probably been dismissed as natural death. No signs of breaking and entering, no wounds on his wife's body, he said. Inspectors don't usually take time for cases like this. Lena then spoke out of turn, interrupting her father. We heard Mommy talking to us last night, she said. She keeps calling me outside to play. Lena also told me that her mother stands outside the window every night when Dad goes to sleep, tapping her sharp fingernail on the glass. Her mom looks extremely pale, much like myself, which I didn't take offense to. She's dirty, covered in mud, her hair untidy and her teeth rather rotten. Lena also said that her mother's eyes glow green in the night. Mr. Elias looked embarrassed. He was afraid that after hearing that I would dismiss the case. He said Lena just misses her mother dearly. That's all it is. He gave me the details of where his home was in the village and asked me to investigate. They lived on a farmhouse, and he also mentioned the cattle getting spooked every night, but that shouldn't hinder my investigation. This grieving husband and daughter just needed closure. It was probably a freak accident. It wasn't uncommon for healthy folk to succumb to a heart attack or their body failing them. When they left my desk, I stood up with them out of respect. Mr. Elias spoke to Miss Ada at the front desk before leaving, while I walked Lena to the front door of the station. What's that in your hand, young lady? I had asked. My tone wasn't threatening or intimidating in any way, rather curious, like someone her age asking the same question. She handed me the small sack-like bag covered in a brown cloth with string tied to it, holding it together. It was found under my mother's bed, she tells me, but father says it's not important. Maybe one of her ingredients inside. She also tells me she thinks it belongs to Aunt Rosa. When Mr. Elias approached us, he saw the bag in my hand. He brushed it off, looked at his daughter, bent down on one knee and said, "This bag is nothing, sweetie. Just Mommy's work stuff, okay?" Just before he could leave, I had asked him if he knew what the bag was, and he said no. Sophia kept her work away from family. He never knew much about what she did and how she did it. I also asked him who Aunt Rosa was, and he seemed rather confused by the question. He gave his daughter a defeated look and sighed. "Rosa was my wife's sister," he said. "Was," I replied. He told me how Rosa died many years ago in a house fire. His wife made it out alive, but she didn't. They were twins. When I bid them farewell, I looked at the small brown sack in my hand. I didn't want to say it in front of Lena. She didn't need to know that this was a hex bag. Evil witches practicing the dark arts deal with that type of stuff. Though the fact that it was kept under the woman's bed told me that her death was not natural by any means. Means, motive, and opportunity. 3 key elements of any investigation. Lena just handed me the means, the tool or the weapon used to commit the crime. However, the motive was missing. Why was the crime committed? Sophia was apparently loved in the village. Why would anyone hurt her? Then there was opportunity. How did the hex bag end up under the bed in the first place? More so, was there even truth in Lena's story? Or was the kid trying to make up stuff to help her cope with her mom's death? Too many variables that weren't adding up. It was 8 p.m. when they left, which meant I had approximately 9.5 hours before sunrise. I donned my long black coat and hat and left the station. The city was far too busy for me to move at my full speed. Too risky, hence I decided to walk. It still rained, though not as heavy. Maybe walking would help me think better. 19 minutes later and I reached the village. The village of Redwater Crossing looked more dire than I remembered, not just because of the storm. Trash can bonfires were everywhere with folk standing around them. Homeless people. When they saw my eyes glowing red in the night, they scurried away before I could hide my face. I hated that. I hated that I was a monster. However, there was a young man part of the group that never ran away, just stared at me without even flinching, so I made a note of that. Then I walked towards the farmhouse and saw Lena waving at me from the bedroom window. Mr. Elias opened the front door and showed me around the house, then made his way back inside. I inspected every corner, every wall, every window. Indeed, there were no signs of forced entry. It baffled me on how the hex bag got in. Maybe someone threw it through the window. But then a strange sensation fell over me. I felt like someone or something was watching me. There was movement in the woods behind me, a dark shadow moving just as quick as I do, but the shadow had antlers. Then, when it ran past the trees, I caught a glimpse of it. My eyes never deceived me before, though with the rain obstructing my vision, I did have doubts. I could have sworn I saw a deer with glowing green eyes running on its hind legs, humanoid-like. There were also unnerving sounds coming from the woods. Screeches, scratches, screams, and howls. I entered the farmhouse and conducted my series of questions. Nothing too heavy, but also not beating around the bush. It wasn't Mr. Elias' statements that I was concerned with. It was Lena's. Just to see if her story checked out, I asked her again what she saw these past few nights. Usually, when people lie or make up stuff, there's always holes in their statements. Hers, however, were rock solid. Then I mentioned Aunt Rosa again, but this time to Mr. Elias. He seemed to get irritated whenever her name was mentioned. When I pulled him aside and told him what the hex bag was, he still didn't believe me. This confirmed his wife's death was not by natural causes, but he was still in denial. Why did I feel like he not only knew about the hex bag, but who it belonged to? Then I realized that if I wanted answers, I needed to speak to the villagers of Redwater Crossing. If Sophia was loved just as much as Mr. Elias says, maybe they knew more about what was going on. Just as I was about to leave, my body froze from what I saw and heard. Inspector Fillian Hunt, Lena called out to me. "Mommy gave me another one of those bags just before you arrived," she said. She gave it to me through the window. I ran towards the kid and grabbed the hex bag from her immediately. Luckily, inside wasn't anything specific to Lena, just a general curse, so I kept it in my pocket. I would be able to withstand whatever curse was put on me, but no harm will come to the child. At first, I thought maybe Lena was seeing her mother's ghost wandering the farmhouse, but those green eyes she mentioned to me back at the police station, that was no coincidence. The deer hiding in the woods, walking like a humanoid creature, having the same eyes. I knew Mr. Elias was hiding something regarding Aunt Rosa. Furthermore, if that creature hiding in the woods was responsible for this, why did it want Lena dead as well? Then I approached the guy that I saw earlier, the one who wasn't afraid of me. A poverty-stricken man with an untidy beard and ragged clothing. He looked like he was in a bad way. He continued standing by the trash can bonfire, sketching something on old crumpled paper. "You're the only one that isn't afraid of me." "Why?" I had asked. He replied, "If a vampire wanted me dead, I'd be dead already." I was taken aback by that statement. I don't do well in those type of situations. Folk generally mention my appearance, but nobody point blank told me that I was a vampire before. "Would you like to buy my sketches, Inspector? Help a homeless man out. 1 silver coin per sketch, just enough for a loaf of bread." I looked at the sketches and they were incredible. He was naturally talented. His name was signed at the bottom in charcoal. William. I gave him coin, but I wasn't going to keep those sketches, rather ask him about them. He drew creatures on those pages, animals in their humanoid form, which is rather bizarre for ordinary folk to draw. "William," I said, "have you seen these creatures around?" "Oh yeah, near the farmhouse ever since Sophia died." "And how was Sophia?" Her husband said she was the village witch and widely loved by all of you.
Oh yeah, definitely, that's true. Not once did she ever charge us homeless folk for medicine. Such a lovely woman she was. Quite the opposite to her sister, in fact.
Her sister? Meaning Rosa?
Yeah, Rosa, that was her name. What a wretched woman she was. She was jealous of Sophia, you know. Ah, they were twins. Really gifted woman. She wanted to make coin from her witchcraft, whereas Sophia just wanted to help people.
And a house fire.
Oh yeah, that was many years ago though. Mr. Elias rescued Sophia from the house, but when he tried to go back for Rosa, it was too late.
So Lena was nowhere in the picture during that time?
Yeah, that's correct. Despite us hating Rosa, it was a tragic accident. We were surprised to see Mr. Elias and Sophia married 1 year later.
Wait, why is that surprising?
Well, Rosa was in love with him. He was in love with her too, I guess, but they weren't in a relationship. The entire village knew that.
I stopped writing in my notepad when he said that. I just needed to confirm one piece of information before making the final verdict of what I thought the deer was in the woods. William, is there any way Rosa would have survived that fire?
Oh, highly unlikely, sir. It seemed like she was cremated in that building. No body was found.
I asked William if he could point me towards Dead Crossing's graveyard, and he did. He wanted me to keep the sketches since I paid for it, but I refused. He could make some real good money with those. When I entered the graveyard, I asked the old man and woman in charge for the location of Sophia's grave. They said there was an issue with the grave and they were rectifying it. They seemed petrified and thought I was going to arrest them. But why? They said the grave was dug out a few nights ago. There was a woman covered in severe burn scars, wearing a hooded cloak that asked to see the grave. When the strange woman left, Sophia's body was just lying there in the opposite direction she was buried in. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I hoped what I saw in the woods was an ordinary shapeshifter, but now, not only did I know it was a skinwalker, but I had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. Skinwalkers were not simply monsters, rather a perversion of the spiritual path. They are human witches that choose their spiritual knowledge and power for evil. However, they aren't born as skinwalkers. For that, there needs to be an initiation, i.e., killing a close family member, most often a sibling. This heinous crime grants them the ability to walk the witchery way, so to speak. They are driven by greed, envy, malice, and the intent to harm. Stories link them to grave robbing as they not only use deceased bones for their rituals, but also have the ability to possess the dead. Furthermore, they can shapeshift into animals depending on their purpose, for speed, agility, or power. This gives them a chance to walk and work in plain sight. Their human or hybrid form doesn't depict them fully human or fully animal, rather in between, like the deer I saw in the woods. Skinwalkers can mimic the voice of others, luring their victims in false belief. That's where the superstition came from. If you hear a familiar voice calling you from the darkness, you should never respond. They are also adept at casting spells and curses, bringing death and illness to their victims, which explains the hexbag. Literally any animal could have entered the house of Mr. Elias and placed the hexbag underneath Sophia's bed. When the village witch died, Rosa's initiation had begun, from killing her own sister out of envy. It also made sense as to why Mr. Elias hated talking about Rosa. He knew she loved him. That guilt was eating him up from inside. Lena was the child of Mr. Elias and Sophia, the only reminder left of the love those two had. Rosa couldn't stand that, hence the hexbag for the child. Lena was just a kid. She saw her mother giving her the hexbag tonight. Why wouldn't she take it? Rosa possessed Sophia's body to do her dirty work. I didn't realize how much time had passed. I heard the village clock and knew it was midnight. But then I heard something that sent chills down my spine.
Lena, dear, come outside to play. Mom is waiting for you.
I ran as quickly as I could. The old couple in the graveyard were probably shocked to see me disappear, so to speak. With haste, I made my way towards William and removed my pistol. He feared for his life, throwing his sketches and coin on the ground, yelling at me to take it. "Relax," I told him. "I'm not going to hurt you." I bent down on one knee near the trash can fire. White ash was on the ground from the burning wood. Then I removed just one bullet from my pistol and smothered it in the white ash. William was rather confused by this but didn't say anything more. I put the bullets back and tipped my hat to William as a way to say thank you. I was running out of time. I moved in a dark wisp of smoke, making my way towards the farmhouse, hoping the Skinwalker didn't get Lena. Lena was grabbed by the Skinwalker in its deer form, an animal that would normally not cause any fear, but Rosa's form in this herbivore was absolutely terrifying. The tall humanoid deer creature with its glowing green eyes looked at me, while drool dripped from its mouth. Mr. Elias ran outside and stood frozen. There have been many examples of fight or flight mode when it came to people. This was one of the cases where I witnessed it in person. Your innocent child crying out for help, and all you could do is just stand there, numb to your soul. I fired a shot into the creature's arm and it dropped Lena onto the ground. The Skinwalker gave a loud shriek and hissed at me, then began changing forms. Rosa began glitching from animal to human and Mr. Elias couldn't believe what he witnessed. I yelled at him to get to Lena and make sure she was safe. The Skinwalker tried to flee into the woods, but I followed it. I hoped the bullet coated in white ash would slow her down. Ideally, I would need a shaman to get rid of the Skinwalker, but time was of the essence. However, despite being wounded, Rosa moved just as quickly as I did. What a terrifying thought, knowing that if she was at her full strength, I wouldn't have stood a chance. But now we were in the woods. The rain was heavy, the night was darker than usual, and I didn't need to hide my vampire self anymore. So I chased the Skinwalker down and tackled her to the ground. We rolled and tussled for a bit and her strength was almost equal to mine. Rosa, in her witch form this time, wearing her dark black hooded cloak, hissed in my face as I tried to move away, while my fangs pushed out. My fingernails grew 6 inches, sharp like razors and curved for clawing. I clawed a chunk of flesh from her arm before she threw me against a tree trunk. My goodness, was she strong. The storm then intensified, and now looking back on it, I wonder if the Skinwalker had anything to do with the weather that night. We fought for a while and her wounds weren't slowing her down the way I hoped they would. However, there was something important that I needed to do, and I knew that I would have to sacrifice taking a few hits. I leaped towards the Skinwalker and sunk my fangs into her neck, holding her tightly against me, making sure she doesn't escape. When she pushed me away, I spat out a chunk of her flesh on the ground. My vision looked bloody, like a red lens was placed over my pupil. That usually happens when my eyes turn red, something that I have no control over. She was angrier than before when I bit her. With blood dripping from my mouth, I smiled. I knew it would piss her off even more. Rosa was now too weak to change into other animals, which made my life easier. The Skinwalker dashed forward towards me looking like a blur. I assumed that's what people saw from me when I moved. She then clawed my shoulder and arm, ripping my coat. I could have stopped her right then and there, but that wasn't the plan. I needed her to be enraged, to be distracted, to be so caught up in trying to kill me that she doesn't realize or feel what I was trying to do. Once I did what I did, I pushed the Skinwalker aside. Rosa gave a loud shriek and began vibrating and glitching, then fled the woods, though I never chased after her. No matter how many times I attacked her, my fangs nor my fingernails would have killed her. From the lore in my library, one could only hope the white ash poisons them from inside, waiting for them to succumb to their wounds. But then again, who said I had to be the one to kill her? When I walked out the woods, I saw Mr. Elias holding a crying Lena. He frantically moved her hair, turned her head, checked her arms and legs to see if there were any wounds on her. Thankfully, there weren't any. His speech and mannerisms were that of a terrified person. He told me that Rosa had to be a skinwalker and that I should have killed her, not let her escape. It annoyed me when he said that. Suddenly, at that moment, he knew what a bloody skinwalker was, yet withheld information about Rosa and pretended to know nothing about the hex bag. I told him that withholding information almost cost him his daughter's life. Lena then seemed to calm down. Mr. Elias looked terribly sad. I could actually see the guilt on his face. I apologized shortly after. Lashing out that way, letting my emotions get the better of me, was not the way a detective inspector should conduct himself. Mr. Elias apologized as well. He was just afraid. He never knew Rosa survived the house fire all those years ago, let alone her performing such a heinous crime. Then he told me in a more respectful way that I shouldn't have let the skinwalker escape. Before they succumb to their wounds, they still have one last curse or spell left in them. I know, I said, though I wouldn't worry much about it. I pointed towards the woods and waited patiently. 3, 2, 1. She's dead, Mr. Elias said, confused. Yes, I said, but I didn't tell him how or why. He didn't need to know that I snuck the hex bag into Rosa's cloak when she attacked me. Since the hex bag had nothing pertaining to Lena, no strands of hair, no fingernails, no saliva, the hex bag was just a general curse that needed to be in the victim's possession for it to work. Rosa used whatever little life remained of hers to curse the child, thinking Lena would have kept the hex bag. However, the skinwalker didn't realize it was cursing itself. Mr. Elias and his daughter gave their final statements back at the police station. Lena gave me the biggest hug she could muster and was surprised to see the wounds on my arm and shoulder had healed. Magic, she said in astonishment. I remember having the biggest smile on my face when I said, yes, magic. Mr. Elias thanked me and I wished them well, watching them leave the station. Just a few more hours left for sunrise. I walked out the police station and sat on a bench outside. I loved how quiet it was. I remembered what Lena had said. Magic. But it wasn't magic though, was it? I wish I could have told her that the cells in my body repair themselves so quickly that the wounds heal accordingly. That small amount of blood from the skinwalker when I bit her helped speed up the process. I wish I could have told her that I was a vampire. I wish I could have told her that I was just like her mother, stigmatized for what we are, when we're just trying to help. I saw Captain Langley through the window burning the midnight oil, so to speak. I thought about how hard he's worked to get into the captain position, and what a damn good captain he is. Not once treated me differently despite how I looked. I have him to thank for giving me this job, let alone me being a detective inspector. However, there was just one more thing I had to do before sunrise. So I went back to the village of Redwater Crossing and spoke to someone. Then I made my way back to the station and entered Captain Langley's office. I told him who I just spoke to, what I spoke about, and if he would consider it. Captain Langley looked at what I handed him, smiled warmly and said, yes, Fillian, it's a done deal. 1 hour later and I was home, sitting on my bed sipping blood from a blood bag, courtesy of Mrs. Almoni, the Redwater veterinarian. I saw the darkness of the night fading away as the sky became brighter. When I walked towards the window, I moved the curtain ever so slightly, just to take a peek at the sunrise and admire how beautiful it was. Then I reached out my hand, letting the sunlight touch my palm even though my skin sizzled while doing so. It was just for a moment, but it always made me smile. Like maybe there will be a time where my skin doesn't burn. Mr. Fenwick, bless his soul, would always tell me sunrise had beauty in it and not just in its appearance. It symbolized a new day, a fresh start, new beginnings. And as I had a cool shower, changed into my sleepwear and got into bed, while everyone else was getting ready for their morning commutes, I thought about what I had learned from the Skinwalker investigation. If that little girl Lena and her father didn't speak up when they did, I never would have been able to save them from the Skinwalker. Speaking up and asking for help, now that takes bravery. And that's what being human is about, is it not? You take that leap of faith and hope you stick the landing. Or if you're lucky enough, someone catches you before you fall. So I slept peacefully that morning, knowing Captain Langley was on board for William to join the RPF as our very first sketch artist in the station. He wanted coin for his sketches when I met him. Well, now he'll be getting a monthly paycheck, sketching witness descriptions of suspects. Though there's one minor difference. He won't be going back to a trash can. He'll have enough to rent a home. William was trying. That's all any of us can ever do. What do you know? Sunrises really do bring new beginnings. Spooky season had just begun, which meant us inspectors were on high alert. Halloween parties and gatherings could easily go wrong. I knew what lurks out there in the city of Redwater. That realistic werewolf costume might not be a costume at all, if you know what I mean. For this case, however, I was dealing with a scarecrow, though not a normal one. The scarecrow existed to watch humans. Farmers who passed it mentioned seeing it work the fields every night. Teenagers reported it running and chasing them away. But when 4 bodies of retired police officers, men in their 50s, were found mutilated, I had to take this case. Because this scarecrow was not waiting for birds at all. It was studying people, patiently waiting to come alive at night. This investigation begins with me standing in the village field of Widow's Peak. The grass was tall and swished against the wind that night. The full moon provided enough light for me to see the body hidden in the tall grass, mutilated in the most horrific way possible. I've seen many terrifying things in my life, both as a vampire and inspector, but seeing the victim lying in the field that way made my stomach turn, though I didn't flinch. Arms were ripped off and the legs were folded around the body. I would have been surprised if there was even a single bone intact. Eyeballs hung out of the eye sockets by a thin strip of connective tissue. Some teeth were broken, the jaw dislocated, and the cranium was crushed. The skull wound was so brutal that it looked like a bat or an iron pole was used. Despite the disfigurations, I recognized the victim, a retired police officer from the Redwater police station. Sergeant Stein still had his uniform on, at least what was left of it. Chief Detective Inspector Lara Mills arrived on scene and asked me to give her a rundown. She was higher ranked than I was and always made me nervous for some reason. I don't know why. I read through and fumbled my small notepad and told her everything that I've observed. She nodded at first without saying anything, then walked away and threw up in the grass. Quite a normal reaction really, I would be surprised if she didn't. I placed my hand on her back and rubbed it gently while handing her a bottle of water. 2 other inspectors were talking to a group of teenagers taking down their statements, so I assumed they were the ones that found the body. The inspectors saw me approaching and respectfully gave me a chance to take it from there. Just before I could even speak, one of the teenagers had said, "Damn dude, why are you so pale? You should get some sunlight or something." "No," I replied, "I'd burst into flames if I did." They seemed confused by what I said, but I took out my notepad, flipped the page to a clean one, then began writing down their statements. They told me how they sneak out of their homes every night on Halloween doing teenager stuff. Farmer Atkins, they said as they pointed towards the house at the end of the field, didn't mind them going there as long as they're not damaging the crops. However, the crops were on the other end of the tall grass, so no worries there. Farmer Atkins may not have an issue, but that darn scarecrow does, they told me as they pointed at it. that thing comes alive at night. I turned towards the Scarecrow and it scared the crap out of me. The effigy was on a tall wooden pole with long untidy hair and large eyes that seemed more hollow than prominent, but it was big, the size of your average human being. I could see tiny yellow eyes looking at me, not human eyes though. Maybe I saw it moving, but I couldn't be sure. What do you mean that it comes alive at night? I had asked. They told me that during the week and day, whenever they walked past the Scarecrow, they could see yellow eyes moving and looking at them. It watches them carefully, studying them. Then the eyes disappear in the hollow eye sockets like a dying flame. But at night, the Scarecrow isn't on the wooden pole anymore. It's actually patrolling the field, pacing around impatiently, waiting for someone or something. Whenever they got too close to the field, meaning off the path, the Scarecrow would bolt towards them, running frantically while the wind blows its hair wildly. Farmers have also backed up these statements by saying they actually saw the Scarecrow working the fields at night. It has a pitchfork, cleaning up and tidying up the place. Then Detective Mills had joined me. She was feeling a lot better and had heard everything. I asked, when the Scarecrow chases you, does it have a weapon in its hand? Is it violent, threatening with the intent to harm you? Whenever I heard statements, no matter how strange they sounded, I never disregarded them. If you give people a chance to speak freely, the investigation becomes easier. That was the bizarre thing they told me. The Scarecrow never harmed them, no matter how many nights they've been there. It chases them, sure, but the way they chase each other in a game of tag. There was even a moment when the Scarecrow was an inch away from them and had actually slowed down its pace just to make them leave the field. However, this night was rather strange. They said they turned this entire thing into one silly game just for the thrill of it. How far could they have entered the field before the Scarecrow came after them? Foolish thinking, of course, just to spike their adrenaline. This time, however, the Scarecrow wasn't interested in them. They saw it walking in the tall grass, dragging something behind it. After they heard a man begging and pleading for his life, they knew it was a person being dragged by the Scarecrow. Then it began beating the man up, using the pitchfork on him like it was digging the ground. When the victim came out in the open, the teenager saw the man dragging his legs behind him. The Scarecrow had broken it. They never noticed it before, but the Scarecrow had long, sharp claws, they said, swinging wildly as they saw chunks of flesh flying in the air. Then it used the handle of the pitchfork and crushed the man's skull. Shortly after, the Scarecrow looked at the teenagers and vanished into a puff of black smoke. When they looked at the wooden pole, the Scarecrow was back on it, lifeless again. The teenagers were then taken home and danger tape was put around the field perimeter. Detective Mills told me that it had to be a man dressed up in a Scarecrow costume committing these murders. It had to be. She never conveyed it as questions, but she said it in a way that was trying to convince herself rather than me. However, I was focused on the Scarecrow on the wooden pole. The pitchfork placed alongside it did indeed have blood on its prongs, and so I put my black gloves on and grabbed the pitchfork to examine it. Next thing I know, my entire body is on the ground like an arched cat. The pitchfork fell to the ground like it weighed a ton. Then I looked at Detective Mills and said, "You really think an ordinary human would be able to lift this thing up, let alone use it?" As the body was taken away, the crowd gasped in horror. Most threw up and others turned their heads away, covering their eyes. Those were reactions I expected. However, the reaction from the mysterious woman dispersing from the crowd wasn't normal. She didn't even flinch, like me. I still have nightmares about what Dracula did to my village all those years ago and how he massacred my people in front of me. I'm kind of immune to seeing horrific things, but she... what did she see before that was so brutal? She wouldn't even flinch at a mutilated body. The mysterious woman disappeared from the crowd, but I took a note of her suspicious activity as well as her appearance. 5'5" at most, grey hooded cloak and brown skin, no more than 40 years of age. Maybe Detective Mills had a point. What if this case didn't have any supernatural elements attached to it? What if it really was a man? A very large, strong man that dressed up in a scarecrow costume, slaughtering folk at night. Maybe the teenagers made up the stuff about disappearing into black smoke because it's Halloween. Though, something in the witness statements confused me. Why didn't the scarecrow harm the teenagers? They even mentioned how it slowed down when it gained too much speed on them. If the scarecrow wanted to hurt them, it would have. This looked more like a targeted motive. Furthermore, what would a retired police officer in his uniform, mind you, be doing in the field at night in the first place? Just a few more hours left for sunrise, so I returned home and read the witness statements over and over again until it became common knowledge. I went through my observations of the crime scene, the mutilation of the body, the heaviness of the pitchfork, the speed of the scarecrow, and the mysterious woman in the crowd. Who was I kidding in that moment? I had nothing. Absolutely nothing. I have never heard of or seen a scarecrow coming alive at night. But why now? Why on Halloween? Why has it been dormant for so long? I passed the time reading books in my basement library of witchcraft, possession, inanimate object controlling, anything dealing with the supernatural that could help me explain the scarecrow. Time went by so quickly that it was already sunset again. Then Detective Mills gave me a call at that moment, informing me there have been 3 more bodies found in the same village field. When I arrived at the scene, the bodies looked like the first victim. They were piled together, still wearing their uniform. So far, the common denominator was their legs being broken. How and why were these retired officers ending up in this field? Why on earth were they wearing the uniform? What the hell was going on in this case? Then I took notes of the horrific state the bodies were in. Inside their pockets were the same notes, same handwriting, same words. Come to the field where it all began. Have your uniform on that you wore so proudly. Signed Kobo. I turned around and looked at the scarecrow. Was this object really committing these crimes? The pitchfork had even more blood on it than before, and even the clothes the scarecrow wore had blood splattered on them. Was Kobo the scarecrow's name? The crowds gathered once again, shouting and accusing us inspectors in an uproar. We were supposed to keep their kids safe. How can their kids attend Halloween parties when there's a psycho on the loose? This time, the incident was reported by a farmer. He said the scarecrow worked the fields when he walked past, humming a tune and cleaning up the weeds, tidying up the grass, watering the crops. It even waved at the farmer passing by on the pathway. But then, Sergeant Noble entered the field shouting at the top of his lungs, "I'm here, let's get this over with." Afterwards, the scarecrow attacked him. This was the most bizarre, unexplainable thing the farmer had witnessed. He said the scarecrow was on the other end but appeared on this side of the grass within a split second, like a puff of black smoke. Then it beat the sergeant to death, again using the pitchfork. That part always baffled me. Being a vampire meant that I had heightened speed and strength, though I couldn't even lift the pitchfork from the ground, let alone swing it. The farmer then ran away, fearing for his life, and called the police. The next murder was reported by a couple taking a romantic stroll in the field. The scarecrow was apparently more agitated towards them, but still didn't harm them. Frightened them to their core, chased them away with more urgency than others, but still didn't harm them. The third body was found by Detective Mills with details of the incident being unknown. She said before she called it in, she walked in the field, trying to find more clues in the tall grass. She yelled at the top of her lungs and the damn scarecrow was standing in front of her. "It's real," she said. "I don't know how, I don't know why, but it's real." The scarecrow chased Detective Mills as she ran for her life, turning around, firing a few shots which did absolutely nothing. Then she tripped and fell to the ground. But the scarecrow immediately stopped. Gently, it picked up Detective Mills and carried her away from the tall grass and back onto the path. Then it vanished into a puff of black smoke, exactly like the witness report. So now we knew the scarecrow wasn't targeting the current inspectors of the RPF, just the retired ones. Detective Mills issued a protective custody order for the remaining 2 of the retired police officers. There were only 6 of them that worked in the police station during that period, and 4 of them were now dead. Out of the 2 remaining officers, 1 of them was a captain. However, the other officer spoke to Mills and told her beforehand that he has something to confess to her, but he wanted full immunity. Lara Mills wasn't dumb. She declined the full immunity proposal but agreed to listen to him. She said that he sounded terrified. Meanwhile, I could not help but notice the mysterious woman being part of the crowd again. Why was she always showing up to the murders? She had to know something. So I left the crime scene while the other inspectors took over. I pushed through the busy crowd as she hastened her pace. She knew I was following her. Then the mysterious woman made her way into a dark alley. Therefore, I looked around me, saw no one was nearby, and moved at the speed of light, reaching the alleyway before she did. She kept looking at the entrance, expecting me to appear, but I walked out of the shadows behind her. "Ma'am," I called out respectfully. "Please do not be afraid, I just have a few..." It's not that I didn't see it coming. I saw the knife, I saw her hand move, but I was more surprised as to why. Then the knife pierced my stomach as she backed away, trembling in fear. My nose felt itchy, so I snuffed, then removed the knife from my stomach. "Ma'am," I said again, "you've just assaulted an inspector. Now we have bigger complications than we did before." "What the hell are you?" she asks me. Her voice filled with bewilderment, but more anger and pain than curiosity. "How did you arrive here before me?" she asked. I didn't say anything, just walked towards her as she backed up, knocking over some trash cans in the alleyway. "I am Detective Inspector Fillian Hunt, Homicide and Supernatural Cases, Redwater Police Force." "You're just like them," she yelled at me. "You're just like the scum of the earth." I frowned. I had an uneasy feeling in my chest, not because of what she said, because I knew this woman appearing at the crime scenes was no coincidence at all. Then I diffused the situation, reassuring her that she may have been mistaken. I shared personal information with her, leaving out the vampire part, of course. I told her that I had been in the RPF for 3 years now. I'm fairly new to all of this compared to the other inspectors that have years upon years over me. She calmed down a bit, but her eyes stayed on me, focused, wary, and prepared to attack. I respected that. One should never trust a stranger. "May I have your name, ma'am?" I had asked. She replied, "It's Kaya." When Kaya unveiled the hood from her cloak, I saw her long braided hair behind her. I saw her brown skin more clearly than before. She was native to this land, the very first people that came to Redwater. My eyes widened as I bowed my head in respect. Her eyes no longer held any hatred. She felt acknowledged when I did that and returned the same respectful gesture. There are so few of them left, scattered around different tribes trying to survive in an ever-changing world. "Kaya," I said, "you know something about these murders taking place in the tall grass, don't you? Why is this happening?" She tells me it was her who had been writing those notes to the retired inspectors, threatening them to show up in the field in the middle of the night. However, she wasn't writing those notes as herself. She was writing them as her husband. "How did you know they would go to that field?" I had asked. "Well," she replied, "it's not every day you receive notes from a dead person. Those 6 inspectors need to die," she told me. "No one listened to me before, but they will listen now." "If they have wronged you, ma'am," I said, "you need to report it to the police station. We can go together, I can help you." "Oh really?" she replied. "Help me like how they've helped me back then." Nobody listened to me. Everyone in that station was corrupt, all 6 of them. I believed the pain in her eyes, but I had no proof of what she was telling me. After all, why should I believe her? She may not be committing these murders, but she is a part of them. Shortly after, we made our way into an old house. Detective Mills tried calling me, but I ignored. Kaya took out a chest which she struggled to carry, so I helped her. She opened it, taking out pages upon pages. Then she threw it at me angrily as the tears poured down her face. "Look at it," she yells at me, "look at them." And so I did. Kaya was telling the truth. In my hand were witness reports that should have been filed, but they were in her possession. I saw the Redwater police station stamp at the bottom right corner. That's how I knew that once these documents were stamped, they should be filed and kept safely for record, not handed back to the statement giver. I wasn't reading them fully, just looking at the time and date. "How did you end up with these?" I had asked confusedly while flipping through the reports. She said it was found in the trash can behind the police station at the time. She thought maybe one of those inspectors had a conscience, had a soul, but she was wrong. Then I read one of the reports and I stumbled towards the table behind me. My eyes widened and I felt the horror consume my expression. "Oh my God," I had said. Kaya burst into tears and fell to her knees as she grabbed her chest like the pain was too much to bear. Her mouth was opened and her jaw tensed, but the sound of the cry wasn't leaving. "Do you know what they did to me, Fillian?" she barely says. "Do you know what those monsters were capable of doing?" "Tell me," I said. "Tell me everything." Kobo was 20 years of age, working the fields in the tall grass. He was a large man with long dark hair and incredibly strong. Kaya, his wife, was the same age, working in the village market selling animal pelts. But this married couple carried stress on their shoulders that would be enough to push them to the ground. Kobo's mother had not been doing well for a very long time. Unfortunately, their village got destroyed by the flood, ruining their equipment and medicine. Kobo, along with his mother and Kaya, traveled to Redwater hoping to seek medical attention. Then at the Redwater hospital, he found out how expensive the treatment would be. Both him and Kaya were barely earning enough to survive on their own, let alone have any savings for the treatment. But there was a nurse in the Redwater hospital who became an angel in disguise for the couple. She told them she would take care of Kobo's mother as best as she could, free of charge, till they get enough coin for the elderly woman's treatment. Hence, Kobo got a job working the field day and night. He worked for a kind man living in the farmhouse that Farmer Atkins currently lives in. This farmer admired how dedicated, hardworking, and determined Kobo was. Kaya was a skilled archer and an even better pelt skinner, thus making her living at the village market. But it was tough. The days seemed so short, but the nights felt longer, and Kobo's mother wasn't getting any better. How long could this couple work themselves into the grave? Most of the time, Kobo and Kaya skipped meals just to add coin to their savings. But then it began taking its toll. Kobo fell ill, Kaya's animal pelts became sloppy, and coin, much like resources, was now scarce. On Halloween, however, the farmer told Kobo that he would have a lot of work to do that day. Teenagers usually play their games in the field at night, and he wouldn't want them getting hurt by large rocks, wild bushy roots, or uneven terrain. Kobo shared a thought with the farmer. What if he worked the whole day and night cleaning up everything just to get a bit more pay? He was hungry, tired, and felt like his bones were failing him. Besides, Kobo and Kaya just needed a little bit more coin for his mother's treatment, and tonight might just be the night that he gets it. From the incredible hard work Kobo had done, as well as the trust he gained from the farmer, this was a done deal. And since this was Kobo's last day, the farmer agreed to pay him even more. Therefore, Kobo with his old pitchfork worked tirelessly for the entire day and night. His sweat soaked the grass more so than a shower of rain ever could. The farmer told Kobo that he would return in an hour or so from visiting family. At that moment, Kaya arrived in the field of the tall grass with food in her hand. Kobo pushed through, not wanting to waste even a minute, but Kaya grabbed him by his ear, forced him to sit down and eat. And so he listened. With how busy life became and how much stress they've both carried, this tiny moment they've shared showed how much of love they've had for each other. Both of them felt at peace, sitting in the tall grass, staring at the full moon, hearing and seeing the teenagers play their Halloween games. It was beautiful. Kaya said it took her 20 years to find her love in the real world, and it'll probably take her 20 years to find him in the afterlife. This night was turning out to be quite perfect until the police officers arrived. Redwater Police Department, before new management, was the most despicable place to go to for help. The inspectors threw their weight around and broke the law, more so than ordinary folk. 5 inspectors patrolled the field that night, shining their flashlights checking for suspicious activity, knowing damn well there wouldn't be none. Then they found Kaya and Kobo sitting in the tall grass. The officers interfered with them because they had the power to do so. They didn't like Kaya or Kobo to be in Redwater, if you know what I mean. Then they passed inappropriate remarks at Kaya, talking about her body touching her shoulder and circling her in the field. Kobo tightened his grip on the pitchfork, but Kaya gave him a side look and shook her head calmly. She knew how wrong this could go. The officers were waiting for anything, literally anything done by Kobo or Kaya to arrest them. However, when they tore her clothing, Kobo reacted. He attacked the police captain, knocking him out with a pitchfork handle. But then the other officers attacked him from behind, like the cowards that they were. They used their batons and broke his legs, beating him to a pulp and smashing his skull. Kaya fought back as well, but the 4 officers, as well as the now conscious captain, had overpowered her. With Kobo's last moments of his life, he saw what the police officers did to Kaya. He saw everything before he died. When the officers left the field that night, the farmer had returned. He saw the horrific act that was done and covered Kaya with his shirt. Then he saw Kobo lying on the ground, lifeless, holding the pitchfork in his hand. Next morning, the farmer went along with Kaya to report the incident at the police station. To their surprise, there were only 6 officers working at the time. However, Kaya recognized the 6th officer wasn't part of the incident, so she filed a report to him. 1 week had passed and nothing had been done, and so she filed statement after statement, only to find that same officer throwing it away in the trash can behind the station. Shortly after, Kobo's mother had passed away. Time passed and the farmer had built a scarecrow on the village field in the memory of Kobo, though the pitchfork was lost somewhere in the grass. When the farmer had died of old age, Farmer Atkins had taken over, leaving the scarecrow untouched. A few weeks later, and the captain found Kaya living in an abandoned house, and the obscene, horrific act that took place on the village field was attempted again. Kaya used a knife to defend herself against him. If it wasn't for the noise of the village crowd, the captain wouldn't have scurried away. But the wounds Kaya obtained that night were brutal. She passed out in the abandoned house, unable to move. Then Detective Mills called me again, and this time I had to answer. She told me the other retired police officer confessed to the crime that happened 20 years ago. He is in custody, but they don't have proof yet, just a confession. It was my job to fetch the retired captain and bring him in. Just before fetching him, I stopped at the police station and hand-delivered the chest Kaya gave me. Detective Mills read a few of them and she burst into tears. This was evidence. The stamp had the police officer's name on it. "Where did you get this?" Mills had asked me. I told her it was the cloaked woman at the crime scenes. She gave it to me. She's still alive. Detective Mills looked confused. She told me there was no cloaked woman at the crime scene, either one of them. But I told her that I would explain later. For now, I had to fetch the retired police captain, but I had a plan of my own. When I got to his home, he was arrogant as ever, calm as well, which really pissed me off. So I decided to ruffle the feathers a bit. I told him the suspect is in the vicinity of his home, and if he doesn't come with me into protective custody, he's going to die. Then the terror and panic settled in, and that's exactly what I wanted from this pathetic excuse of life. He was grabbing his coat, but I said there's no time for that. Get in the vehicle and let's go. I sat in the back with him and he complained a few times that my grip on his arm was too tight. So I apologized and tightened my grip even more. Numerous times he asked me who was driving the vehicle, but I ignored him. Then he began freaking out and I wasn't sure why. Then the vehicle stopped. I pushed him out, grabbed his arm and walked with him. He was so paranoid that he didn't realize we were heading towards the tall grass. He was more confused as to who was driving the vehicle, but he didn't need to know it was Kaya. I didn't throw him into the tall grass, but I didn't need to save him either. The Scarecrow emerged from its puff of smoke, appearing larger than ever. And then, all I could hear was the retired captain being slaughtered. I heard the impact of the pitchfork. I heard his legs breaking. I heard his skull crushing and caving in. I heard it all. Kaya stood next to me watching it all unfold, and then she dealt the finishing blow. However, when everything was over, I did tell Kaya I would need to burn the pitchfork to set Kobo's soul free. I hated suggesting it, but oftentimes vengeful spirits can become uncontrollable. Kobo might not realize that he had already taken care of the officers and lash out at other inspectors. I had every reason to believe that he would. The fact that Kobo as a scarecrow still walks the fields at night tells me that he doesn't realize he is dead. He doesn't realize that he needs to stop working and that he can rest. He still thinks he's saving up coin for his dying mother. Kaya spoke to Kobo and he nodded his head at me kindly and threw the pitchfork on the ground. Then I understood why it was so heavy. That was the only object his soul was latched onto. I had to be careful when lighting the match or I could combust into flames before the pitchfork did. But then, as I did throw the match on the ground, Kaya removed the knife from her cloak and tossed it alongside the pitchfork. "Forgive me," I said, "I don't seem to understand." She smiled. This was the first time that I saw her smile. She said, "It seems you have misunderstood my story, Fillian. When I passed out from my wounds 20 years ago in that abandoned house, no one said anything about me making it out alive." My heart sank when she said that. Everything hit me all at once. Detective Mills doesn't miss anything. She never saw Kaya in the crowd at the crime scenes because Kaya wasn't there. The retired police captain kept asking me who was driving the vehicle, and I thought it was because Kaya wasn't in uniform, when in reality, no one was behind the wheel at all. I realized that is why the murders took place tonight. Salimi. 20 years to find him in the real world and 20 years to find him in the afterlife. Just as Kobo's soul latched onto his pitchfork, Kaya's soul was latched onto the knife she used to defend herself against the captain. Both objects caught alight and Kaya and Kobo held hands waving goodbye as they slowly evaporated. I waved goodbye as well, but I had tears rolling down my face. You may wonder if I feel bad or have any regrets for not taking the retired captain to the police station. You're probably wondering if I ever felt like I failed in my duty that night. The answer is no, not one bit. I swore to fight for injustice experienced by common folk when I became an inspector. I swore to fight for those who lost their strength to do so. I swore to get rid of monsters. So that night I did do my job. However, there is something that I took away from the Scarecrow investigation. Monsters do exist. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's not the frightening, eerie-looking scarecrow standing in the tall grass that you have to worry about. Sometimes, it's humans. Working the night shift brings you up against all sorts of monsters, old and new. However, this one was rather different. I was dealing with a Class 5 spectral manifestation, the highest class that could appear in the flesh when it wanted to. No fangs or bloodlust, no claws or furry disguise, just a hole or emptiness where his head's supposed to be. No lock, gate, or door could have stopped him, for he was the personification of mortality, riding on unseen roads between the living and dead. Folk kept many names for him, but for this investigation, just as eerie as his appearance, I called him the Headless Horseman. Work hadn't been going good lately. Being a detective inspector dealing with supernatural cases meant my suspects were rarely put behind bars. I watched other inspectors bring in criminals in handcuffs, being applauded for their work. I felt stuck, like my rank of detective inspector would soon be snatched away for not doing enough. William from the Skinwalker Investigation, now the sketch artist in our station, was busier than ever, especially with that night being All Hallows Eve. Miss Ada at the front desk, trying to keep herself awake, redirected a woman towards my desk. I stood up, placing my hand on my chest, neatening my black waistcoat over my white shirt, and gave a warm smile. Detective Inspector Fillian Hunt, at your service. How may I help you today, madam? I had asked. Despite my pale appearance, my demeanor usually calms people down, but she was incredibly anxious. Her hands were sweaty and she always rubbed them together. Her eyes were droopy behind those spectacles, but she forced them to stay opened, like her eyelids weighed more than a ton. Then the woman introduced herself as Lola and took a seat. Lola was startled at the slightest of noises heard in the Redwater police station as well as outside. With heavy rain crashing against the window, with distant thunder rumbling in the sky, with a sound of a pencil sharpener at the end of the room, she was terrified at everything. She began telling me that her neighbor Mr. Granger died last year, and there was a long pause after that sentence, though I never interrupted. I wasn't going anywhere and Miss Lola could take all the time that she needed. But why was she telling me a story from a year ago? She repeated that sentence, then continued. Mr. Granger was a healthy man, strong as an ox, never got sick and never had any injuries. However, the night before he died, he became rather paranoid. He told them that a piece of paper traveled in the wind, burning at the edges despite the rain trying to douse it. The corners turned to crisp, blackened and torn until the wind carried it past his window. When he walked outside to pick the note up and throw it into the bin, it had his name on it, written in blood. Next morning, when they all knocked on his door, nobody answered. Worried and concerned, they broke the door down only to find him lying on the stairs, lifeless. He never fell, he never choked, and he wasn't poisoned according to the mortician. But he died that night. Whenever she said that sentence, it was always softer, emphasizing the paradoxical, confusing certainty to what happened. Lola told me that she and maybe a few others knew how Mr. Granger died, and it's because he whispered the old man's name. Now normally I would give folk a chance to speak, but I could see Miss Lola wasn't in the right state of mind. And if she skimmed through this incident, an important detail could be missed if I wasn't careful. Forgive me for interrupting, madam, but who is the he you are referring to? I had asked. Inspector, she said. Have you ever heard of the Dullahan? No, ma'am, I don't think I have. And so she explained. One dark, rainy night on All Hallows Eve in the quiet town of Shiverlow, the fog didn't roll or travel, it lingered, hovering if you will. Nothing helped it disperse that night, not even the heavy rains or strong winds. It was midnight, folk were asleep, and the town was silent enough to hear a pin drop. But some of them, like Miss Lola, heard the terror in the distance. She could hear a horse traveling against the wind, its hooves monstrous and thunderous, stamping against the dampened ground. This horse didn't neigh, snort, or lip flap, rather wailed in an eerie, high-pitched shriek. However, the sound of the carriage it pulled was in competition for the loudness of its noise. The large wooden wheels with uneven and irregular rhythmic knocks on the ground approached slowly. The air felt heavy and the night darker than before. Flashes of lightning followed by thunder cracks couldn't drown out the noise of this monstrous horse approaching. Lola heard a whip slapping on the ground as it got closer, but not a whip made of leather. It sounded firmer, stronger, like a hard object cracking the surface with every gallop. Lola moved her curtain ever so slightly, widening her eyes as the carriage entered the town. The horse wasn't normal. It was a nightmare mount, old and rotting with glowing red eyes that could pierce through his soul. But how did it even enter the town? The gate was closed. She couldn't decipher the noise coming from the carriage behind the horse, a crackling, rumbling sound like wooden balls rolling and smashing against each other. But then, she saw it. She saw the bones inside the carriage, femurs, craniums, mandibles, sternums, clavicles, and a pelvis moving side to side. And if that wasn't frightening enough, she understood why the whoop sounded the way it did, because the whoop was made from a human spine. And then the dark horse finally reared and she caught a glimpse of the rider. A tall, slender figure wearing a dark black cloak and large boots tapping against the sides of the horse's body. However, when Lola followed the rider's body from toe to head, she gasped in horror and closed the curtain immediately, for the horseman's head was not part of his body, rather carried beneath his arm. This entire time, the rider never dismounted his horse, rather moved around the house back and forth, until he came to a dead stop. Then he whispered a name with a voice that sounded so frail, like he was gasping for air from his trachea being crushed.
Mr. Granger.
Lola watched Mr. Granger's soul trying to claw and grip onto the window that he floated out of, being pulled into the carriage like it was a magnet. And that was the end of it. Then the night fell silent, just the way it had been before the rider entered. When the horseman left the town of Shiverlow, the confirmation of the rider, his horse, or even the carriage being otherworldly was solidified. Shiverlow had a large gate, taller than any carriage, any horse, or even the largest werewolf. This gate was strong, reinforced with massive locks and chains. Nobody could enter or exit the town after 10 p.m. with the exception of emergencies. And yet, this headless horseman with his carriage of bones and a whip made of human spine dissipated into the gate, crossing it like it never existed as a barrier at all. I was rather confused. Redwater had many towns and villages, but why did the horseman choose Shiverlow? And why was Mr. Granger his victim? I asked Lola if there was anything Mr. Granger did last year. Maybe he knew the horseman, maybe there was animosity there. No, not at all, Lola answered. She said there was no rhyme or reason to the supernatural incident. This headless horseman targeted innocent people, and that he was a maniac causing havoc in Shiverlow, and that I should investigate rather than asking a million questions. How strange, I thought. She became so agitated when I asked her if Mr. Granger had done anything. I noticed how defensive she was to clear her town or herself of any wrongdoing. Miss Lola, I said, is there something you're not telling me? I knew when people lied or withheld information. I could hear Miss Lola's heartbeat racing, thumping against her ribcage like a drum being pounded. Miss Lola, I feel like something else happened for you to come here tonight, am I right? Lola burst into tears, breathing frantically as I fetched her a cup of water. It's okay, I said, take your time. I need you to be honest with me so I can help you and your town. She said before the rider left the town that night, the horseman's head being held beneath his arms had these smoldering red eyes and an evil smile that stretched his jaw so wide. She looked directly into those red eyes and time seemed to stand still. The rain had stopped for a split second, and the bones inside the carriage moved to the other side like they were making room for another passenger. Then the carriage door squeaked and opened ever so slowly. Now back at the station, Miss Lola, with her trembling hand, reached into her handbag and handed me a note of parchment burnt at the edges. What do I do? She cried out to me. I heard him tonight. I heard him whispering. I looked at the parchment note and I understood the worry, despair, and sheer panic on the woman's face. Tonight was All Hallows Eve and he has returned. Lola's name was written on the parchment note in blood. Lola was the next victim, and the countdown to midnight had just begun. It was 9 p.m. when I reached the town of Shiverlow. Shiverlow was a small, dark, gloomy town located in a valley and looked quite spooky even for a vampire. The fog indeed hovered, like an uninvited visitor lingering for too long. The houses were small but cozy, with warm lights shining through the windows. There was a large gate made of solid steel at the entrance. Chains were wrapped around the locks, reinforcing it entirely. I looked around to see if anyone was nearby, then grabbed the gate and shook it with all the might that I could muster, trying to barge it open. Though it wouldn't have budged if they didn't open it for me. First thing off the checklist, Lola wasn't exaggerating. The horseman rode through the gate along with his carriage, and there was no other entrance in the town. The townsfolk of Shiverlow stood outside, watching me enter their home, so to speak. The men tipped their hats off and the woman curtsied as I took my own hat off out of respect. Normally, I would conduct my questioning outside, but the rain that night never subsided, not even for a minute. I entered a cozy tavern while they sat in front of me, but they kept the lights off. Only jack-o'-lanterns lighting up the room, being carried or kept on the tables by the townfolk. I had asked them about last year's Halloween, and while most of them were asleep when it happened, others told the same story Lola did. Interesting, I said. When I asked them if any of them looked into the horseman's eyes, 10 people raised their hands. Damn. Okay, did any of you get the parchment note with your names on it? I had asked. They said no. Now the investigation became even harder. Fair enough, Lola did say there was no rhyme or reason to this, but why out of the 11 people, including Lola, did the horseman whisper her name? How did he even know it in the first place? Then I looked at Lola again and said, "Hey, you weren't wearing that a few hours ago." "Yeah," she replied. "I put it on just now while packing my bags to leave town." Lola had a gold chain across her neck as the cross sat on her chest. Contrary to popular belief, no, I will not burn if I touch it. She had been praying since she left the station, and I would be foolish to ask why. She said the gravedigger had given it to her as she pointed at him through the window. Well, it looked like I needed to have a chat with the gravedigger. But then at that moment, I heard strong, heavy hooves galloping in the distance. I heard the wailing neigh from the horse and the uneven rhythmic sounds from the wooden carriage wheels rolling on the ground. The headless horseman was approaching. Panic struck the tavern as the townsfolk scurried about frantically, but I stood up and yelled for everyone to stay calm. Lola sat in the corner trembling with fear. I reached my hand out to her and told her to come outside with me. The horseman will not cause any harm to her as long as she stood behind me. It seemed heroic in that moment, but truth be told, I had not the slightest clue on how to defeat this thing. All I knew is that if this headless horseman was indeed real as the townfolk claimed, I could get Lola to safety or even out of town with my vampiric speed before he could do anything. We walked outside and she remained behind me. There he was, standing at the entrance of the gate, but this time he wasn't holding his head beneath his arms. I could see black mist emanating from his spectral body and his nightmare mount having redder eyes than I did. He thrashed his whip on the ground, slap after slap after slap. I didn't have to wait long enough to see it for myself. The headless horseman rode through the gate like it wasn't even there. The townfolk gathered outside behind me, standing frozen with widened eyes, too scared to even breathe. I walked towards the gate and Lola, reluctant as ever, followed me. "Stay behind me," I whispered. "It's going to be okay." As weird as this may sound, despite the horseman not having a head, just emptiness or a hollow above his neck, I could still see his face, or at least I imagined it. I looked at him and said, "You're not welcome in this town. This woman has done nothing wrong. Shiverlow is under my protection. Be gone, you evil spirit." How strange, I thought. Did I really see a flicker of hesitance? Was the horseman really afraid of me? His horse tried moving forward, but he kept pulling the reins, halting it as it squealed. He could dissipate the way that he did through the gate, so why was he so still in that moment? before the blink of an eye. His whip uncoiled in the heavy wind as he lashed it forward, cracking the air, heading straight towards my face as Lola screamed. Quite interesting, I said. No harm came to Lola, by the way. In fact, the whip did not strike anyone standing behind me, because the whip was right there in my fist, grabbed tightly. After a while, the townfolk realized that I had caught it. A whip made of actual spine, I said out aloud. I didn't think it would be real. However, the wound on my hand caused by the whip wasn't healing. I could then see everything in red, which meant my corneas changed color, just the way they normally do when I'm preparing for a fight. Then the Headless Horseman spoke, as his voice traveled in the wind from the hollow above his neck.
Fillian, you are not marked for death, for yours has already been done. I do not seek a soul from a vampire.
Crap, I told myself. I hoped the townfolk were so terrified that they didn't hear the vampire part. Maybe they did, maybe they did not, but thankfully nobody cared in that moment. How did the horseman know my name, or anyone's name for that matter, will always be an unsolved mystery. At that moment, Lola's handbag caught alight as she unzipped it, trying to take out the stuff from inside. It was the note that had her name on it that began burning to ashes, falling to the ground. The Headless Horseman looked at the gravedigger in the distance, standing near the churchyard.
You, Mr. Leslie.
And then the rider, along with his carriage of bones and the nightmare horse, rode away through the gates of Shiverlow before disappearing into the night. And just as Lola experienced, the new parchment note blowing in the wind now had Mr. Leslie's name written on it, in blood. Though when I turned around to look at Mr. Leslie, the gravedigger, the 60-year-old man was not standing there anymore. He fled into the woods, exactly where I could hear the nightmarish horse galloping towards. The townsfolk were so focused on what I was looking at behind them. Before they turned around, I dashed so fast out of town that I probably seemed like I disappeared. I then caught up to Mr. Leslie in the woods, and he was terrified when I appeared in front of him. "What the hell are you?" he asked me, but I said there was no time. "What is really going on here, Mr. Leslie?" I had asked. The gravedigger knew something about the Headless Horseman, and not just from Mr. Granger's death last year. He gave Lola a gold chain with a cross on it, and I suspected the horseman's reluctance was linked to the chain itself. I just didn't know why. Maybe the cross on it had something to do with that. Mr. Leslie told me that I wasn't entirely wrong. It wasn't the cross that stopped the horseman though, but the gold itself. I stood with my arms folded, staring deep into the gravedigger's eyes. "You know who the Headless Horseman is, don't you?" Mr. Leslie replied, "My dear boy, not only do I know who he is, I was there when his head came off." All Hallows Eve, or Halloween, is a time where spirits roam freely. The idea of dressing up in spooky costumes was not a party trend, though it was done to fit in the crowd, just for an entirely different reason. When folk made themselves look scary, spirits never bothered them because they thought, like them, they were stuck in the veil. While most were frightened during this time, trying to repel spirits and prevent possession, others welcomed it. For in the town of Shiverlow, there was such a man named Horace Gunter. He had been a recluse, a miserly landowner who despised prayer, laughter, and every gentle sound that reminded him the world still had warmth left in it. Horace Gunter's house squatted at the edge of town, its dark windows nailed shut, its garden nothing more than dirt and bone dust. Rumor had it that he never slept at night. Some swore they saw candlelight flickering from his basement long after the bells tolled midnight. And when the church hymns echoed through Shiverlow's valley on Sundays, he'd hammer at his walls and curse so loud, even the crows abandoned his roof. The man had been evil long before the horseman was ever born. But why did he hate prayer so much? On Halloween, most folk in Shiverlow could not afford material, face paint, disguises, or even a pumpkin to carve on the night. Therefore, they would pray. They would pray for hours on end, warding off any evil spirits that may enter the town or possess their children. This angered Horace Gunther, as he was inviting these spirits into town, wishing to make deals with them. This evil man performed rituals in his basement, hoping one of the spirits would accept his deal in exchange for immense wealth. Finally, on that same night, a very powerful evil spirit broke through the town of Shiverlow and entered Mr. Gunther's basement. Horace was willing to kill the townfolk, offering up their souls to this evil spirit as his end of the bargain. And so the spirit accepted the deal, damning his soul. However, a group of teenagers at the time, Mr. Leslie the gravedigger being one of them, had overheard the entire ordeal. So Leslie dug out a grave of the richest man that lived in Shiverlow, a man that asked for his treasures and wealth to be buried with him. When Horace rode in on his dark horse, Mr. Leslie called out to him, lying that his wealth has arrived. Ecstatic and overjoyed, fully succumbed by greed, he rushed to the dugout grave to find a large chest of gold, not realizing that his deal would be broken without him fulfilling his end of the bargain. When Leslie and his friends stood by, hoping this evil man would take the gold and leave Shiverlow, the spirit of the man who owned the wealth rose from the soil on All Hallows Eve and shrieked at Horace. "Fool," the ghost whispered, "you dare touch another man's wealth?" Frightened and spooked, both Horace and his horse had fell into the grave. However, the impact of the horse falling on top of him was too much to handle, especially with his fall only being broken by the chest of gold in the grave, which ripped his head clean off. Mr. Leslie and his friends were terrified. They didn't expect it to end in this manner. They wanted to stop Horace, sure, but in a way that got him out of town, not to kill him. That incident was covered up and buried, just like Horace and his horse. Once I heard the story, I covered my face in sheer worry and defeat. "So the Headless Horseman is a fae," I said. Mr. Leslie asked, "What is a fae?" I told him it was a spirit, twisted by grief and hatred. Horace became a cursed soul through damnation. Faes are not demons in the biblical sense. Rather, they embody the same chaos and malice that demons do, but still obey the laws of the otherworld. Every night on All Hallows Eve, he returns to the town of Shiverlow, trying to fulfill his deal either for his soul to be free or for the delusion of his wealth waiting for him. However, it explained the encounter that I had with the Headless Horseman back in the town. He was never trying to attack me with the whip. Instead, he was trying to destroy the cross chain around Lola's neck. He hated prayer, but more importantly, he hated gold. It frightened him, just the way it did in his last moments before his death. There was indeed a rhyme and reason to who he was targeting on Halloween night. The Headless Horseman was going after all those who prayed in the town of Shiverlow. Then I asked the gravedigger if he could keep my secret. There was no way I would have been able to escort him back to town without using my full speed. "I do not wish to lie to you, Mr. Leslie. The horseman was correct. I am a vampire, but I am here to do good if you let me." Though the gravedigger was so distraught, I don't think he processed anything I told him. "Hold tight, Mr. Leslie," I said, and dashed forward, and within a few seconds we were back in Shiverlow. He fell to his knees and threw up, which was quite a normal thing to do considering an ordinary human traveling at vampiric speed. But then, I could hear the horse galloping against the wind. Therefore, with haste, I spoke to the townspeople. "Kind folk, gather all your gold jewelry, anything gold at all, even a mere coin will do. Hurry now, the horseman approaches." And so the townsfolk of Shiverlow heeded my request, frantically running into their homes, retrieving any gold items they had. I told them what the plan was. They needed to remain hidden until I told them otherwise. And then, the Headless Horseman broke through the gates of Shiverlow. This time he was angrier than ever. No dissipation, No otherworldly supernatural black mists traveling with the wind. The malice he carried in his soul shattered the locks and chains, and he was riding straight towards me. It's been so long since I felt this way. I felt fear. Then I remembered I still had his whip made of human spine and used that against him. Whenever he tried to attack, I dodged and lashed the whip at him. It never wounded him, just struck right through his spectral body as his nightmarish horse gave a wailing neigh.
Fool,
he whispered.
You cannot kill me.
I know, I replied. I wasn't trying to. I just needed to lure him into an area of the town that would be easier for the townfolk, and then I yelled at them to do it. Then the people of Shiverlow emerged from the shadows and threw their gold possessions at the Headless Horseman. Gold chains wrapped around his neck and coins struck him like bullets. His spectral body could not deflect those gold items, no matter how small they were. Then the townsfolk began reciting their prayers. So softly they spoke, whispering under their breath. And yet, to the Headless Horseman, he felt his soul being blasted by their words. He wailed and shrieked just like his horse, as the wooden carriage in the distance burst into flames. His body moved unnaturally like he was being electrocuted. And then, chunks of his darkened soul began floating in the air. And so, the Headless Horseman fled the town of Shiverlow, with fear and pain latched onto his soul, just the way it did before he fell into the grave all those years ago. But as he rode away, disappearing into the night, I realized that he wouldn't be killed so easily, but chased away for a very long time. However, whenever he does return, I will be waiting for him, for my crossbow arrows, now coated with melted gold, has his name on it. Then a group of people from Shiverlow had provided their statements at the Redwater police station, closing the case file. Before I returned home, I stopped at the local market stall to buy a bag of candy to leave outside for the folk that still may be trick-or-treating tonight. When I entered my kitchen, I poured myself a cup of blood and reflected on how I felt at the beginning of the night. I felt stuck, but why? Why did I associate that feeling with the lack of reward? Was my purpose so trivial that I needed something tangible to validate my work? What exactly was I basing my merits on in the first place? Why was I comparing myself to others? I wanted to make a difference in Redwater, a difference in the world, giving folk hope that while people like Horace Gunther may exist, there are others out there ready to fight for good. I thought about the greed Horace Gunther had and the gold he damned his soul for, but I felt pity for him, even in his death, for the realization of what he had done and how he died had still escaped his understanding. Being a vampire, the belief of immortality follows you, but that's not entirely true. Yes, I won't die from natural causes or severe wounds on my body, but a sharp object through my heart and I will cease to exist. And that still makes this undead life valuable to me. Progress can oftentimes feel slow. The road can feel steeper than most. But just as you develop the courage and strength to reach such a point, why would you give up when the path ahead seems uncertain? I never slept that morning. I realized, was the road actually steep or was I making it such? When I slowed down, took a deep breath in and walked the path rather than chasing it, it felt a lot better. Not easier, but better. Chasing and pursuing are two entirely different things, something that took me a very long time to grasp. I was so fixated on making a difference in the world that I wanted it to happen overnight. Then I remembered, it's cases like these that help me take the first step towards that, and that's what matters. For much like the Headless Horseman, we may be buried with our prized possessions, but we cannot leave with them. Instead, we will be remembered for how we lived. And I didn't want to be remembered for someone who was bitter, angry at the world, with hatred, malice, and jealousy in his heart. I wanted to be remembered with all the noise, distractions, and comparisons in this world. as someone who tried to do good with the time that he had left. This investigation began in Raven Pine Valley, located on the outskirts of Houndsville, southeast of Redwater, a rather secluded area known for its woods of tall, dark evergreen trees that gleam under the moonlight. For the past 7 years, Raven Pine Valley has had numerous attacks in the woods. Most folk claim that it was a wild animal, while others were certain it was a werewolf. Normally, I would tell you about werewolves for the intro to pique curiosity, but this time I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to make this horror story just as challenging as the investigation was for me. These are the suspects in the case file. Let's see as the investigation unfolds, based on the witness reports and the information that I received, if you can guess which one of these men was the werewolf responsible for these attacks. First suspect, Mr. Hexley, the head woodland ranger, a 40-year-old man that knew the woods better than anybody, excellent at close-quarter combat and skilled with all sorts of weapons, though always busy and rarely available, especially at night, thus leaving the maintenance and the safety of the woods to his colleagues. Second suspect, the town elder, Mr. Ward, a 55-year-old blind man handling the town and woodland matters since a teenager, widely loved, respected, and a cherished member of the community. Though he wasn't born blind, he lost his eyesight in a terrible accident many years ago. He's also the grieving husband of Justine. Third suspect, Sheriff Andy Ward, an inexperienced 29-year-old man that didn't want to be there. He's the grieving son of Justine, reserved, shy, never made eye contact, and lost one of his ears in a terrible accident many years ago. He wears a hearing aid on the other ear, communicates through sign language or written word. Folk mention that he's frequently out of office at night. Fourth suspect, Louis Armitage, 32 years of age, lives with his girlfriend Hannah in the town of Houndsville, next to the woods with a vantage point of the camping sites. Known for secrecy, isolation, and strange sounds coming from his house during the full moon, folk reported seeing him buy raw meat at the market and eating it. Okay, so let's get into it. This case file begins with me, Detective Inspector Fillian Hunt in Houndsville, reading the reports of the camping trips in the woods that went horribly wrong. Chapter 1. The first camping trip, March. Houndsville didn't have much in terms of recreational activities, but Raven Pine Valley is where the money came in. Folk would go on hikes, camping trips, weekend aways, a beautiful tourist attraction indeed. Mountains were surrounding the woods and wildlife a great distance away, but not too far from admiring their beauty. However, there have been cases at least once every year of a wild animal entering the woods. Mr. Hexley, the woodland ranger, has taken precautionary measures for such cases. Bells are attached to rope on every third or fourth tree to alert the rangers. Lucas, along with 6 of his friends, booked a camping trip in Raven Pine Valley. This trip wasn't for leisure though. Lucas and his mates were researchers, studying ornithology at the University of Houndsville, which is the branch of zoology focusing on birds. They figured since Raven Pine Valley has a history of new species of animals, perhaps they would be lucky enough to gather data for their research paper. Mr. Ward, the town elder, as well as Mr. Hexley, the woodland ranger, along with his team, welcomed the group with hospitable behavior. They also met the sheriff of Houndsville before setting up camp. This wasn't a coincidence though. Everyone who enters the woods by signed agreement have to meet Sheriff Andy. Raven Pine Valley did not allow loud weapons to be carried into the woods, with the exception of the sheriff or the woodland rangers. Wildlife was incredibly important in that area, especially with the location being the border from the jungle of Belrue. One mesmerizing night, when 3 young men, including Lucas, and 3 young women, including Melissa, his girlfriend, set up camp, sitting around a campfire talking about life, birds, research, and anything they felt passionate about. They loved on how bright the woods were that night. They gazed upon the full moon that looked larger than it ever had been, not realizing that exact same thing they were admiring would cause their massacre. Lucas and Melissa then took a romantic stroll, leaving their friends behind. Oh, it was quite lovely. Lovely indeed, until they stumbled upon tracks in the woods. At first, they looked like huge wolf prints or any large four-legged animal deep in the dirt with claws dragging ever so slightly. Then something changed. The night became darker and the once bright moon, lighting up the woods, had become a reddish-orange color. Then a few steps ahead, the paw marks disappeared, and suddenly the tracks were different. 2 paws or feet, longer strides, heavier like whatever it was, stood up. However, the bipedal prints were not equally distributed in weight, like the heels were doing less work than before. Lucas and Melissa could almost picture it, a massive hulking shape walking through the trees on 2 legs. He said that it felt like it knew you knew it was there, and just didn't care that you did. Just as the couple was about to ring the bell, they heard their friends screaming, screams that were filled with fear. "Quick, ring the bell," Lucas said, as they both ran back to the campsite. While running frantically, they heard horrible sounds. Growls rumbling the ground, a vicious snort, a ferocious roar, and then the sound of flesh being chewed and bones being snapped. Suddenly, the screams from their friends, which started off loud with gumption, had been abruptly silenced. The woodland rangers, with weapons and flashlights in their hands, reached the campsite before the couple did, though it was too late. The camping tent had a massive claw mark, ripping the material with ease. There was blood everywhere with no sign of who or what was responsible. One of the woodland rangers said she thinks the flashlight scared it away. Normally, the sound of the bells was so loud they scare anything away. So why did it still have time to attack these people? The only way the couple identified their friends were from their clothing and limbs ripped apart and spread out around the campsite. Some of their body parts were up in the trees, some on the ground and some in the camping tent itself, but none of their heads were found. Lucas told me that it was weird how Sheriff Andy wasn't present in the woods. "What do you mean?" I had asked. "Well," he replied, "when the woodland rangers arrived, they, meaning him and his girlfriend, expected the sheriff to be there. Raven Pine was a small town secluded with nothing else going on at the time. Just awfully strange for him not to be present. But then again," he said, "it was really late, past midnight or so. Woodland Ranger Mr. Hexley was nowhere to be seen either." Melissa mentioned after the attack, she thought she saw red eyes looking at them from the darkness far away, though she couldn't be sure. After all, she was distraught. However, after a long wait at the police station, the couple reported it to the sheriff when he returned. No further progress was made in the investigation. The case file was closed and declared a wild animal attack. No other incident took place during that month. More so, the area of the first campsite was then closed off and restricted with warning signs. With months of sleepless nights, Lucas and his girlfriend called Captain Langley in the Redwater police force, specifically asking to see me, and gave me the report. I honestly had nothing to go on here. The only thing pointing to a werewolf would be the blood moon. Realistically, the tracks, the claw marks, the state of which the victims' bodies were in, could very much be exactly what Sheriff Andy had said. A wild animal attack. Speaking of the sheriff, I made a note. When everyone reached the woods after the attack, Sheriff Andy wasn't present, nor was Mr. Hexley. From this report, those two were my key suspects. Then the second report came in and things got a bit more complicated. Chapter 2. The second camping trip. September. Mr. Boston Ross went on a hiking weekend at Raven Pine Valley. Despite the incident in March 6 months ago, things toned down and the place boomed again. Many tourists arrived, had camping trips, went on hikes, sightseeing and relaxing with no issues whatsoever. When he camped at night, he was smart enough to find a spot near the bell to ring for any danger. The woods were busy though, a lot of people camping that night. However, curiosity got the better of him and he decided to venture the woods. Not too far though, just to the spot of the reported tracks to see if they were real. However, before he ventured too far, forget seeing the tracks on the ground, he saw the return of the supposedly wild animal. He could see the mist from the animal's nostrils from every exhale. Ross then took a few steps back, but he had to be careful though. The previous night rained heavy and the mud was thick. At first, it looked like a large wolf behind the trees, glowing orange eyes staring at him before the lunar eclipse took over. The creature then gradually stood up, and Ross thought this monster would not stop growing. It had to be at least 9 feet tall. Thick, dark gray fur blowing in the cool breeze that night. He ran for the bell and so did the others at their respective camping spots, but none of them reached it. The werewolf, despite its size, moved like a shadow creeping up behind each tree, snatching victims away like they were being pulled by magnets. The creature seemed to first target those who were near the bells, like it didn't want them to ring it. Panic struck the woods as folk began running to the entrance. They yelled, shouted, and screamed for help as they could see the woodland rangers' flashlights in the distance. But everything happened too fast. Ross ran for his life, but with each step he could hear people being devoured. He heard their bodies being ripped apart like cleavers removing chunks of their flesh. He heard the munching and growls and the disgusting sound of blood curdling inside the monster's mouth. Then before he knew it, there was no one else running behind him, as they all were taken. The woodland rangers were closer than before and Ross felt a glimmer of hope reach his eyes. But then, he tripped and fell, rolling in the thick mud covering his body completely. When he landed onto his stomach, he rolled onto his back and froze. Quickly, he covered his mouth, trying not to make a noise or even breathe. The werewolf was in front of him, larger than ever. Blood soaked into its fur, its teeth long and sharp, and pieces of flesh were still on its claws. Though quickly, Ross looked around the woods and saw blood everywhere. On the ground, scattered in the trees, toes and fingernails spread out and a few limbs here and there, with chunks of hair lying about. His eyes widened as the thick mud cleared itself from his eyelids, but still he didn't move. However, why wasn't the werewolf moving either? The creature snuffed over and over again, staring deep into Ross's eyes, looking into the man's soul, though it never attacked. No leap, lunge, dash, or pounce, just stood there staring at the man covered in mud, trying to be silent as ever. Then the werewolf turned around and walked away with haste. For some reason, the monster moved like it was in a hurry, almost like he could hear the woodland rangers at the entrance of the woods. Their reaction time when described this way seemed abysmal, but the werewolf made it so. It was too damn quick in devouring its victims. Then the beast walked towards the shadows, with only its silhouette showing in the blood moon. Ross, slowly but silently as possible, dragged himself on the ground, crawling away, but keeping his eyes focused on the werewolf. It then carried the heads of its victims, the ones it removed clean off like an executioner, then packed them away into the sack. Just as the werewolf carried the sack over its shoulder, with blood dripping from the bottom of it, the sheriff fired a shot at the werewolf, wounding the back of its shoulder. The werewolf bolted away, first on the ground running like a human, then on all fours, and then jumping and leaping from tree to tree, disappearing into the night. I asked Mr. Ross if Mr. Hexley, the head woodland ranger, was present at the time. No, he replied, just as I was about to put him on the top of my list as a suspected werewolf. Mr. Ross told me something that made me scratch off the name entirely. The reason the woodland rangers took so long to reach the woods that night was because they found a body near a cave entrance. Head detached, same as the other victims, but this time it wasn't taken. This time it was kept there. That's how they identified him as Mr. Hexley. So for those of you who may have thought the head woodland ranger was the werewolf, your guess would have unfortunately been wrong. And for those of you who suspected Sheriff Andy, he was the one that shot the werewolf's shoulder. Scratch him off the list, you think? Your choice. But in my line of supernatural investigations, I knew that a monster can appear at two places at once, so I kept him on my list. It still did not explain his disappearance in the first report. But at this point, the investigation became more mind-boggling than it was before. Hence, on a dark, stormy night in the city of Houndsville, near Ravenpine Valley, I paid a visit to the other two suspects that haven't been mentioned as much thus far. Mr. Ward, the 55-year-old blind town elder, and 32-year-old Louis Armitage, who displayed traits, all pointing towards a werewolf. Chapter 3: The Natural-Born Werewolf. Thankfully, that day was dark and gloomy with heavy rain soaking the ground. I didn't need to wait for nightfall to walk into the town. It was 5 p.m. when I reached the main section of Houndsville. Tensions ran high. Folks stayed indoors whispering their own conspiracy theories of what had been going on. I could hear their whispers like they were talking right next to me. They looked at me walking into the town, paler than the clouds above. Sheriff Andy, along with the Woodland Rangers, were busy investigating Mr. Hexley's demise, and I didn't want to bother them during that time. So I asked folk nearby for the address of Mr. Louis Armitage as they pointed towards the ridge point of an isolated house. When I knocked on his door, I saw someone moving the curtain by the window inside. It was a woman with long red hair and a black t-shirt. I knocked again, this time announcing who I was as well as my rank of a police officer. When Louis Armitage opened the door, he immediately growled at me. His fangs pushed out his mouth, the skin of his nose creased and his eyes turned yellow. From just setting his eyes on me, he knew I was a vampire. Now, contrary to popular belief, the vampires in the city of Cascada may need permission to enter a home, but I don't. Within a split second, I dashed inside, grabbed Louis Armitage behind the neck, tripped his legs in front and held him to the ground. My fingernails grew 6 inches as I pointed my index finger at his girlfriend, Hannah, just before she could make a move. My eyes squinted as I looked at her, head to toe, then said, "Interesting. You're a she-werewolf. So few of you remain out there." Louis Armitage tried fighting me off, moving his body vigorously, but who was he kidding? He probably had me mistaken for a vampire from Cascada. He never knew I was light years ahead of those fools in skill, speed, and power. Then I looked back at Hannah and continued, "Like I said, there's so few of you left. Would you like me to reduce that number even more?" I could see my red eyes in the reflection of hers. Mr. Armitage continued struggling but stopped when I said, "Listen, I'm just here to ask you a few questions. We can do this in a polite, civilized manner and ignore this foolish feud werewolves have with vampires. Or we could do this the hard way, where I rip your head from your neck. Which one is it going to be?" He growled at me for the last time and then stopped. I released my grip and Louis walked towards his girlfriend as she checked on him. I adjusted my long black coat and brushed my hair back with my fingers. I smiled kindly, respectfully, and warmly like I always do, then introduced myself again. "May we talk?" I had asked. Nervously, he sat in front of me when he threw a question at me. "I've never come across a vampire like you. Are you a hybrid? Where does that strength come from?" I understood the bewilderment in Mr. Armitage's mind. He was 6'5" and built like a brick wall. In normal situations, he would have put me down, but this wasn't a normal situation now, was it? "That's not important," I replied. Folk in Houndsville reported suspicious activity from you at markets, buying and eating raw meat, living in secrecy and isolation, and coincidentally there are werewolf attacks in the woods. Are you the one responsible? I asked a question that I already knew the answer to. It's a technique us detective inspectors use to gauge if a suspect is lying or not. More so, unlike other detectives, I could hear his heartbeat. It wasn't racing, so he wasn't lying. Mr. Louis Armitage was indeed a werewolf, just not the werewolf responsible for those attacks in the woods. When his eyes changed color and his fangs pushed out, I knew that he was a natural-born werewolf. I just wanted him to tell me. Natural-born werewolves are the only werewolves that show resemblance to their creature counterpart while being human. They are also werewolves like normal wolves, just much larger. They only transform in the presence of a full moon, and judging by how weak he was in comparison to my own strength, I knew that he wouldn't be responsible for such a massacre. Furthermore, natural-born werewolves only hunt other animals. It's against their code to target humans, as most of them are married to non-werewolf folk. And that's why I never started with him. When people told me that he was buying raw meat at the markets and eating it, I knew that it would be animal meat. Would be really strange for a market to sell human flesh. Cursed werewolves, on the other hand, do walk on their hind legs, and their transformation is rather instant. The outlier was, cursed werewolves don't really need a full moon to transform, which is why Louis Armitage was a suspect. Hannah walked me down to her basement, showing me the chains they use to restrain themselves during a full moon. It's occasions like those they buy the raw meat for. Indeed, there were precautionary measures taken for the monster that awakens at night. Those were the strange sounds the townfolk were hearing during a full moon. However, just to be sure, I asked Louis if he could remove his shirt and show me the back of his shoulder. He was rather confused by this, but did so anyway. I examined his shoulder carefully, looking for creases in the skin, scar tissue, any marks at all. Werewolves can heal from their regenerative abilities and heightened immune system, though wounds still leave a mark. The report mentioned the werewolf was shot behind its shoulder, and Louis Armitage had no signs of that. Then we spoke about the town elder Mr. Ward and if Louis knew anything about the accident the old man had many years ago. Maybe chemicals splashed into his eyes, maybe damaged retinas. What eyes? Louis retorted. Mr. Ward doesn't have any eyes left to begin with. His eyes were ripped out of his face. Many people in the town believed that he was the first victim in the monster attack. Louis said it was right after Justine had supposedly passed away. Hold on, what do you mean supposedly? Is she dead or not? I had asked. He replied, well, yeah, I guess. So much time has passed, she has to be dead by now. It's just strange, you know. Mrs. Ward was fit as a fiddle, but they said she died of natural causes. They even had a closed coffin funeral for her. I was going to ask another question, but I could see something festering in Mr. Louis' eyes, so I waited. Silences for me were never awkward. And then he spoke. Long time ago, people began speaking about a werewolf deity in Houndsville. My eyes lifted from my notepad and looked at Mr. Armitage and Hannah when he said that. He continued, folk have been talking. Some say the deity's presence is stronger when there's a blood moon out. I don't know if you looked around, Inspector, he said, but this is Houndsville, home to natural-born werewolves. We live by a code. Those attacks in the woods are not just hunting or feeding kills. Those kills are ritualistic. Whatever this thing is, it's not a wild animal. My alpha wanted to put an end to these attacks in the woods, and one night he went up against this unknown creature, and he died. Mr. Armitage told me the alpha was just as strong as I was. I bid him and Hannah farewell and left. So for those of you who suspected Mr. Louis Armitage was a werewolf, you would be correct. But he wasn't the werewolf responsible for those attacks. Mr. Hexley and Mr. Louis Armitage, 2 suspects scratched off the list, which meant I had to pay a visit to father and son, Mr. Ward and Sheriff Andy. Chapter 4: The Cave of Ravenpine Valley. Mr. Archibald Ward was a pleasant human being. He walked around with a guide or mobility cane. He wore thick brown shades of sunglasses which really suited him well. Furthermore, Archibald, despite his age, had a full set of white hair and a grey beard. He told me about his dealings with the town matters, Ravenpine Valley being a tourist attraction, and how much time he spent cultivating the place. Mr. Ward also spoke about the werewolf attacks, of which he seemed incredibly frustrated and disheartened about, like everything he's worked for had been going down the drain. It was his suggestion to install bells in the woods. I asked him about his eyesight as respectfully as I possibly could, but he grimaced at the sound of that. "I do not wish to talk about that, Inspector," he said in an eerie whisper. "Don't ask my son about it either. We are very happy to answer every question you have, but don't ask us about that incident ever again." "Forgive me," I replied, and so I changed the topic. Then I looked at his glasses and said, "I'm sure you visit the woods often, sir, though it cannot be easy for you. I've noticed there was a long stone staircase leading up to the campsites." I opened my notepad and asked, "Just curious, Mr. Ward, do you know how many steps there are there? I would like to know what I'm getting myself into before starting the trail." "Ah, yes, the staircase," he said proudly, like he was the one that built it. "You know, Inspector, I honestly don't know the answer to that. But yes, I do visit the woods often. With company, of course, and sometimes alone. It's my duty as town elder." Before we could continue, the woodland rangers called me with urgency. They wanted me to see what they found. When I reached the location, I saw a chalk-drawn figure on the ground. The drawing showed the head detached and placed a great distance away from the rest of the body, outside the cave entrance. That's where they found Mr. Hexley's body. The cave itself was under the woods per se, very well hidden, and efforts were made to make it look camouflaged with long branches and leaves. The woodland rangers stood by the cave entrance covering their mouths, trying not to throw up. They gestured for me to enter, but their expressions were rather horrified. Then I took out my small flashlight, covered my nose with my long black coat, and walked in. My word, the stench was awful. However, what I saw next stiffened my legs and froze me with horror. There were heads inside the cave, spread out equally, placed on plates. Candles were lit by each one of them. The woodland rangers told me the heads belonged to the victims in the attacks, as well as the missing folk throughout the years. Etched onto a cave wall was a drawing of a monstrous werewolf wearing a crown. I've seen many werewolves before, frightening and terrifying, but this one looked truly evil. This creature looked all too familiar. "Have you seen this before?" the woodland rangers had asked me. "Yes," I replied. "The creature on the wall is Lycaon." Mr. Louis Armitage was right. This was a ritual. There was a story I read from a book in my library in my basement. Lycaon was the king of Arcadia, known for his arrogance and a lack of reverence. His name comes from the Greek word Lykos, meaning wolf. One day, Lycaon wanted to test whether the god Zeus was truly all-knowing. To do so, he decided on a gruesome experiment to serve raw human flesh to Zeus, disguised among other foods. Zeus, however, immediately sensed the horrific act. With rage, he overturned the table, struck the house with lightning, then transformed Lycaon into a werewolf as punishment for his savagery. Now, in my world, some say his spirit wanders the night when there is a blood moon, an omen that lifts the veil between the living and dead, when evil spirits roam freely. Lycaon's spirit haunts ordinary men to become werewolves by sacrificing their own flesh as well as their loved one. Once the first step in the ritual is complete, they would be cursed as a werewolf with immense power for the rest of their life. Rumor has it their transformation during a blood moon is the strongest, though they can lose the curse and their power if frequent sacrifices aren't made to Lycaon. Now I understood why the werewolf didn't devour the heads of his victims, rather packed them away into a sack. This was just a month, or so I believed. So it seemed Mr. Hexley was performing his own investigation under the radar, which explained his absence that night in the first report. It also seemed like when he found the cave he knew who the werewolf was, and so it killed him. His body was not left there by accident. His body was left there to send a message for anyone poking their noses where it shouldn't be. I told the woodland rangers to take photographs of inside the cave and burn everything, then report the findings to the higher-ups in the police force. And so they agreed. But there was one thing left for them to do for me. I said, make an announcement in the town. Tell them what you found. Tell them about the ritual about the victims' heads and Mr. Hexley's body. Also tell them that I, Detective Inspector Fillian Hunt, was the one who destroyed everything inside the cave. Tell them that I burned down the ritual site. Furthermore, I continued, casually mentioned that I will be spending my last night in Raven Pine Valley, camping in the woods. The woodland rangers were confused but agreed nevertheless. And so I prepared myself that night. Raven Pine Valley didn't allow loud weapons, but that was quite alright. I packed my bow and silver arrows from home when I left for this trip. Silver was one of the weaknesses of werewolves. It burns them from the inside, wounds their regenerative abilities cannot heal. I set up my camping tent in the same spot the other victims were in, and patiently waited for the werewolf of Raven Pine Valley to find me. And I had a hunch, well, more than a hunch, that when I encountered the werewolf, the creature would be missing an ear. Chapter 5. Werewolf Identity Revealed. Sheriff Andy avoided me like the plague. Maybe because he knew, much like Mr. Louis Armitage, that I was a vampire. He was worried that his rage and ferocity would be visible to the townfolk when he saw me. While waiting for him in the woods, I used my silver arrows to sharpen my fingernails. Then I thought about the first report very carefully. The woodland rangers said the bells were so loud they scare anything away, but it wouldn't have worked against Sheriff Andy, as he wouldn't have heard them in the first place. Being a werewolf doesn't magically fix your human shortcomings. Yes, werewolves can heal, but only from wounds caused in their werewolf form, not long-term injuries or illnesses that were inflicted before transformation. That's the tragedy of cursed werewolves. It doesn't change who you are, it only amplifies what you are. With his hearing gone, his eyesight had been heightened as a human, thus amplified as a werewolf. He saw the woodland rangers coming from a mile away that night, then fled the woods before they caught a glimpse of him. Why flee, you may ask? Because Sheriff Andy had to rush to the cave during the blood moon and make an offering to Lycaon for the ritual. Now the werewolf arrived angrier than ever. After all, I did destroy his ritual site, or so he believed. His ear was missing in his werewolf form as expected. He was monstrous, ferocious, and dark like the night, showing his gnarly fangs as his red eyes met mine. Then I readied a silver arrow in my bow and let go. 2 arrows pierced his legs by the time he reached me. I underestimated him. I thought he would have been weaker. I heard his fur burning and his skin sizzling from the silver, though that never stopped him. We tussled for a long while until I was under the werewolf. His furry arms pressed down on my chest and drool dripped from his mouth. Oh, he was cursed. I had never seen rage like that before. I used my sharp fingernails and dug them into his neck as he roared in anger, hiding the pain. I then stood up while my fingernails were still in his neck and threw him against the tree. Despite being cursed, I could see the worry in his expression. Worry mixed with confusion as to how a vampire like myself could do that. He got up to his feet rather quickly and charged towards me like a freight train. And that's exactly what I was hoping he would do. I dodged at the very last second, only using my hips and shoulders, then tightened the grip on my silver arrow held discreetly and slammed it through the top of his skull straight to his brain. His red eyes switched off like a fused light bulb as he fell to the ground, shrinking back into the man that he once was. I could have packed up and left in that moment. I could return home, get a paycheck, and stamp the case file as closed. After all, I defeated the werewolf of Raven Pine Valley. Or did I? When you're a detective inspector, it's your job to pay attention to every single detail in an investigation, no matter how contradictory it may be, no matter how far along it was, and no matter how much your brain tries to make you forget. Why would I have left in that moment when I was waiting for the second werewolf? Oh yes, there were always two of them. Sheriff Andy Ward may have matched everything in the first report, but his appearance and movement had nothing to do with the second. For the second report, the bells never rang. The werewolf's eyes were yellow, not red. Mr. Boston Ross in the second camping trip said the monster stared at him deep in his eyes, then walked away sniffing the entire time. But the werewolf couldn't smell the victim, not when he was covered in mud, nor could he see the victim, for the werewolf was blind. I knew Mr. Ward, the town elder, lied through his teeth when I interviewed him, and I knew it when I asked him about the steps leading up to the campsite. He said he visited the woods often because that was his duty to handle every matter in town. And yet he couldn't tell me how many steps were on that stairway. Now, do you know what a blind man does when walking up and down a staircase that he visits frequently? He counts the steps. The werewolf in the second report relied on sound. He snatched the victims away from their frantic footsteps, heavy breathing and screams before they rang the bells, as he knew it would alert the woodland rangers. After all, it was his suggestion to install them. More so, he would not be able to hear them coming, with the screams drowning out the rangers' footsteps. However, since the bells never sounded, the werewolf didn't hear the rangers coming until they were right there. Sheriff Andy, his son, shot the werewolf in that moment, knowing his father would heal and making it seem to everyone else that he was in the clear of any accusations. Then there was the matter of the first report. The werewolf was scared off by the flashlights. Mr. Ward wouldn't have seen any of that. There had always been two werewolves, though I never had enough evidence to prove it. Then it was the matter of Justine, Mr. Ward's wife and Andy's mother. Louis Armitage said she was fit as a fiddle and died of natural causes, yet they had a closed coffin funeral. Then I remembered the ritual inside the cave and the first step to begin the werewolf curse. There was no way Sheriff Andy would sacrifice his own mother to the werewolf deity without his father knowing. Andy sliced off his ear, Mr. Ward dug out his eyes, and both of them sacrificed their very own Justine as an offering. And so when Mr. Ward in his 9-foot werewolf form with glowing yellow eyes, sharp teeth and claws longer than mine had arrived in the woods, I knew Mr. Ward's werewolf form would be much stronger than his son's. He was larger with much more experience. Although I didn't feel like it was Mr. Ward in that moment, I felt like I was fighting like Heion, possessing the man. He used his razor-sharp claws and took swipes at my body. I watched pieces of my flesh flying in the air while trying to dodge his attacks. Besides, for Ragnar Leifson, Mr. Ward was the quickest werewolf I fought at the time. I was kinda outmatched at first. Weak and bloodied, I tried composing myself. I knew the werewolf was far stronger than I was. But what if I used one of his strengths against him? Using my vampire ability to run like the wind, I dashed forward, ringing every bell in the woods of Raven Pine Valley. Mr. Ward tried catching me, but I was too quick for him this time. Really difficult to catch a vampire when your eardrums are bleeding from the bells ringing in your ears. His equilibrium was way off. Then when he fell to his knees, covering his ears, grunting and growling, I waited for the roar of frustration, and when it surpassed, I drew the silver arrow and released my bowstring. The woodland rangers arrived at the woods after the bells rang and saw Sheriff Andy Ward in his human form lying on the ground with strands of werewolf fur next to him. Then they looked at Mr. Ward, the town elder, with a silver arrow between his eyes. I gave them my statement, ran down the case with them, and explained everything that I could. They were surprised to see me still standing, considering the state of my clothes were in. My wounds were healing. I had to hurry though. Sunrise was approaching, and this time there were clear skies. When I left the town a few hours later, I saw Mr. Louis Armitage and his girlfriend Hannah looking at me, nodding their heads with respect in a way to thank me, and so I did the same. What do you know? Vampires and werewolves really can get along. The Werewolves of Ravenpine Valley was one of the toughest cases that I had ever worked in my career. I went into this investigation thinking that I was searching for one werewolf only. However, in an investigation, not only are details important, but witness statements as well should carefully be examined and studied for further deductions. See it like pieces of a puzzle. You may complete a portion of it thinking you know exactly where it's leading, but you'll never see the full picture without completing it. That's the thing about being a detective inspector. This time, however, it wasn't vampiric speed, strength, or skill that saved folk from Ravenpine Valley from further werewolf attacks in the woods. This time it was intellect. As much as I wanted to return home, sup on my mug of blood, have a shower, change into my pajamas, and hit the bed, I couldn't. Captain Langley had called me while I was on the train back home, mentioning to me that there was another case that I had to deal with in Redwater. Some strange creature being called the Wendigo. Hunger is supposed to end when you feed, but the Wendigo is what happens when it doesn't. When the hunger outlasts the body, the soul, and every ounce of reason in the mind. Out here, it isn't just a creature, it's a contagion of craving. You don't see it stalking you, you feel it. The longer you stay out in the cold, the louder its whispers become. What do you do when the cold blanket of desperation covers your mind and freezes your judgment? What do you do when the hunger isn't in your stomach, but in your soul? I've investigated monsters before, but this one stayed true to the meaning of its name, the devourer of mankind. This chapter is the story of Swift Runner, a man whose life descended into a darkness so profound it mirrored the very spirit his people warned against. The events primarily unfolded during the brutal winter of 1878 to 1879 in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Swift Runner at the time was generally known as a capable Cree hunter, a guide and a family man occasionally employed by the NWMP, Northwest Mounted Police. However, his life was already marked by instability. He had developed significant troubles with booze, which had led to friction within his community and even with the authorities, who eventually sent him away from the settlement. When winter arrived, a season that tested the limits of human endurance in the subarctic plains, Swift Runner took his immediate family, his wife, his mother, his brother, and 6 of his children deep into the isolated forest to trap and hunt. This wasn't unusual. Families sought sustenance together, and with resources being low, the more hands and eyes the better. However, as the cold deepened and the game became scarce, the situation grew desperate. Now, in most books in my basement library hidden to the world, there have been many versions of the terrifying tale that follows, But at this point, this is where the traditional folklore merges with the recorded history. In the oral traditions of the Cree, a state of profound desperation exacerbated by isolation can invite the evil spirit of gluttony and excess, the Wendigo. This term is often translated as the evil spirit that devours mankind. It preys on weakness, driving the afflicted individual toward the ultimate taboo, cannibalism. As the scarcity continued, the first death occurred. Swift Runner's eldest son succumbed to starvation. According to historical accounts, this loss served as a catalyst. Now, instead of maintaining the moral imperative to share resources or seeking aid, Swift Runner turned upon the rest of his kin. He systematically murdered his wife, his mother, his brother, and his remaining 5 children over the course of the winter. However, he did not merely kill them, he consumed their bodies to sustain himself. And he was meticulous in this horror, wasting nothing, even reportedly cracking open bones just to consume the marrow. This horrid act distinguished the case from homicide to mere survival cannibalism, something that, as mind-boggling as it was understood during that time of great famine. When the spring thaw finally arrived, Swift Runner reappeared alone near the community, reporting that the rest of his family had perished from starvation. However, his condition was suspiciously strong, healthy, and vigorous. He looked well-fed, yet something about him chilled even the seasoned trappers. His eyes were glassy and his voice hollow. Then the community and subsequently the authorities grew suspicious of his solitary survival. When inspectors investigated, they followed Swift Runner back to his desolate winter camp. The scene they discovered was beyond comprehension. Human remains, the butchered and consumed evidence of his entire family. Faced with overwhelming proof, Swift Runner did not offer a defense of starvation or accident. Instead, he claimed the defense rooted in his cultural context. He had been possessed by the Wendigo spirit. This claim placed the authorities in an incredibly difficult situation. They were confronting a violent, confessed murderer, yet he was framing his actions within the context of a spiritual illness recognized by his own people, a condition seen as a complete loss of humanity. Shortly after, Swift Runner was then arrested. The trial took place in Fort Saskatchewan in 1879. The court did not recognize the spiritual defense of Wendigo psychosis, which is the psychological phenomenon involving the craving of human flesh. Rather, they saw a man who had systematically murdered and eaten 8 members of his own family, especially after sustenance could have potentially been reached from the nearby Hudson's Bay Company post. He was convicted of murder and met the noose that spring. Some accounts state that he was outwardly calm, even joking about the awkwardness of the executioners preparing the rope. He was repentant for the act of murder in the eyes of the law, but his claim of spiritual coercion remained central to his story right up until his death. So why am I sharing the horrific legacy of Swift Runner with you? What does his story have to do with my case file? Well, since then the world has reset, and as a vampire I've been alive for almost a century, yet not old enough to see the world change. Real events that supposedly happened before my time now exist merely as stories, either documented by folklorists or hunters passing down their journals. Except this time, I was unfortunate enough to come face to face with a Wendigo. It has no shadow, no heartbeat, only the stench of decay carried in the wind. Locals thought it was an old legend, a spooky tale to scare travelers from wandering too far north. However, when you've seen its handiwork, you stop calling it a myth. When Captain Langley called me to investigate a northern campsite, I came across a cabin where a family once lived. Detective Mills apprehended the suspect, who shared a similar story to Swift Runner. But for this case file, I knew there was more that meets the eye. Inside the cabin, the fire had been going, though barely, maybe a few days old, but the raw meat on the table was fresh and body temperature warm. Meat, not belonging to an animal. The air was still, heavy with the scent of pine and something profoundly wrong. I stood at the edge of the police tape, my coat's collar high, letting the raw elements of the subarctic night keep my eyes opened. Truth be told, I was suffering in these cold temperatures. Vampires generally function better in the cold night, but I had trouble. Nevertheless, a normal cop would have been blinded by the sheer mess outside the cabin. The snow was thick, but not like a blanket, more like a dirty canvas that had blood soaked into it. But I wasn't a normal cop. I didn't just see the blood, I saw the signature of the Wendigo. It was about time that I put my vampire senses to good use. My gaze dropped to the nearest cluster of remains, fragments scattered across the snow, starkly visible under my fellow inspectors' flashlights, but they couldn't see what I saw. Piles and heaps of bones spread out around the cabin. The first set that I stumbled upon had visible fractures caused by sheer brute force. However, the bones were not easily distinguishable. It wasn't a cleaver or a saw that was used to dismember the body, rather claws. Long, slender, razor-sharp claws or fingernails so strong I could see the scratch marks engraved into the bones. Then I took out my notepad and jotted something down. Check if suspect inside has long fingernails. However, before I stepped aside, I caught a whiff of something. There was a strange smell in this location. The stench of decay was heavy, but beneath that was a layer of chemical confusion. An old copper scent, coagulated blood mixed with a stinging ammonia. Most of the remains in the area had the same smell. But then when I moved on to the next batch of bones, that observation became rather conflicting. There was a femur on the ground that had a faint mist emanating from it. Of course, others couldn't see it, but I could. Human remains, even recently frozen, should register as an absolute zero on my internal thermometer, meaning I don't see any radiating heat or energy from it. It just becomes part of the landscape like the remains I saw in the previous pile. Yet, touching the femur that was heaped up in this new pile, gently rubbing my thumb over its perfectly uniform edge, I registered a faint lingering heat. How strange. I also observed the bones were straight with clean edges, not jagged or irregular. I could see the teeth from the saw blade on those bones, showing the marrow extracted within the last few hours, maybe even minutes, just before the current suspect had been apprehended. Furthermore, other than the smell of the victim's remains, there was nothing else that stung my nose, not like the previous pile. No copper, metallic or rotting smell that I picked up from earlier. This batch was done by a human, which meant the suspect inside the cabin, being questioned by Detective Mills and Captain Langley, was guilty. But he wasn't the only one responsible for the massacre. There were two methods of kill at that location. One that showed a wild, ruthless, ferocious method of attack, while the other was still despicable and horrific, but less animalistic. How on earth was I going to convince my human partners of everything I observe in a crime scene? They stood by the window inside the cabin, gesturing for me to come in. I nodded my head, making my way towards the door. With each step forward, my eyes scanned the campsite once more, looking for details that I may have missed. Besides for the actual bones of the victims, their teeth, their hair, their fingernails, and their toenails remained. A clear sign of cannibalism. Then there were also large tracks in the snow leading towards the woods next to the village. One set human and one set non-human. The prints were too long, with claw marks at the ends. The monster tracks were indeed from the Wendigo. I remembered seeing the sketches in the lore journals passed down by hunters. Nevertheless, I wrote in my notepad, check if suspect is barefoot, just in case that he may be the actual Wendigo. When I entered the cabin, Chief Detective Inspector Mills was questioning the suspect, a healthy man wearing tattered village clothing with long untidy hair, sitting on the floor in the corner of the cabin, swaying back and forth. He went by the name Francis the Village Hunter, and this was his cabin. The raw meat on the table were the remains of his own family, supposedly fallen victim to the Wendigo. I checked if he wore shoes, and he did. I checked if his fingernails were long and razor sharp, and they weren't. Something really fishy was going on there. While he told his story to Detective Mills and Captain Langley, I read through their respective notepads of the witness reports. Folks said it stood just beyond the tree line, tall and thin, bones pushing through tightly wrapped skin like it was starving to death, but still moving fast. Its eyes glowed pale like snow filled its hollow eye sockets. One of the hunters swore it wasn't human anymore. Its mouth stretched too wide, teeth too long. Then it walked on two legs, but its joints bent weirdly, like it was walking on stilts. Next report said the thing moved between the trees faster than a deer, but you could still see the ribs and tendons through the skin. Every time it turned its head, it cracked, like frozen wood snapping. Someone claimed they saw its reflection in the window, tall as the doorway with a face that looked half human, half skull. When they looked again, it was gone, though the glass was frosted over from the inside. Next report said it followed them for miles, staying just out of sight. When they stopped to rest, it stopped too. When they ran, it ran faster, then disappeared. This report took place in the woods. Then the snowstorm hit, and through the blizzard, a shape moved on all fours. Thin arms dragging behind, long fingers digging through the ice like claws. They said it screamed like it was starving, an evil shriek so loud it echoed through that winter's night. Then I closed my notepad and listened to what Francis had told my colleagues, that he had nightmares of an evil entity whispering to him, convincing him to devour his village folk. He saw flashes of the creature's face appearing in his thoughts and in his peripheral vision. He said that he felt his stomach turning and the hunger intensifying. Francis then began crying. He mentioned the Wendigo creature-like spirit possessed him, but he tried fighting the hold it had on him. When he felt a veil of murky phlegm covering his eyes, the next was history. He couldn't recall a single detail after that moment, awfully similar to Swiftrunner. Francis kept mentioning Wendigo psychosis as a justification. I walked around the wooden table observing the raw meat placed on top. I bent forward, pushing my nose closer to the meat as Detective Mills thought I was going crazy. Then I snuffed. No stench of copper or coagulated blood mixed with stinging ammonia. This carving of meat on the table was done by a human, not a Wendigo. While they were talking, I interrupted with a question, but this time directed at Francis. So tell me, when the victim's limbs were sawed off, was that you or the Wendigo? Langley, Mills, and Francis looked at me at the same time. What are you talking about? They replied. I looked at Francis dead in his eyes. I feared my eyes would turn red momentarily, or maybe my fangs would have pushed out. I was burning with rage. What a lying piece of shit this man was. He milked the Wendigo psychosis story, knowing how the councils and courts now feel about it. Now they were more lenient towards it than they were back then, as many believed the execution of Swiftrunner was unjust and indeed a Wendigo had possessed him. But I wasn't the court or the council. Detective Mills and Captain Langley may have fallen victim to this fool sob story, but I didn't. I despised cannibals. They could conjure up whatever excuses they wanted to, and I wouldn't believe it. I ushered Captain Langley and Detective Mills outside, pretending to show them something. They were confused but went along with it anyway. Truth be told, I just needed them to exit the cabin. Once they did, I dashed backwards, shutting the door behind me and wedging the handle with a chair. Mills and Langley knocked on the door repeatedly, yelling at me to open up. With the windows frosted and visibility obscure from outside the cabin looking in, I dashed forward before Francis could blink. I grabbed his jaw with my right hand as my sharp fingernails pierced through the sides of his mouth. I wanted to crush his jaw right then and there, but I needed answers. I saw the reflection of my red eyes in his own. "You piece of filth," I told him. "You know natural-born werewolves may be furry creatures with a stench so foul you have to cover your nose from them. But you, cannibals like you, are fouler than any monster I have come across." "What are you?" Francis said nervously, trembling immensely. "Do you think I do not know how this works?" I told him. "Do you think I know not of how the Wendigo chooses its victims for possession?" I don't know what you're talking about," he replied with screams of help that followed. Now all the inspectors were banging against the door and I could see Mills approaching the window to break it. I tightened my grip on his jaw and I heard it crack a little. "You had eaten people before, have you not? You used your tools to dismember them and you ate them raw, like the disgusting piece of shit that you are. That's why the Wendigo whispered to you. That's why you were opened up to possession. Those whispers, the nightmares, the flashy images in your brain doesn't just happen to anyone." Francis the Hunter widened his eyes in a shocking realization that I knew everything. "You did not butcher and devour your family because the Wendigo possessed you. That thing possessed you because you had butchered and ate people before. You've become a vessel for it, a toy that it can play with. That's why tonight it coexisted with you without using your body. There are two methods of kill outside this cabin, one done by you and one done by the Wendigo. So from entity, it showed itself as a creature, but the creature didn't attack you. It spared you. And it seems like not only was it familiar with the trail, but it knew exactly where you lived. Not only do you know where the Wendigo is, but you know who he is. And it knows you. Take me to it, or your body parts will be on that table, and I don't need tools to dismember you." I knew this was disorderly conduct from an inspector, but I did not see myself as the vampire cop in this case file. I saw myself just as a vampire. When it came to cannibals, I had no tolerance. However, my actions in this part of the investigation would be my downfall later on in the case. Just as the window shattered from Detective Mills' elbow, I grabbed Francis the Hunter behind the neck and dashed out the other window. Now we were in the winter woods of Redwater, traveling a dark, treacherous path, with Francis leading me to the Wendigo. Though I had to speed it up, I could feel the cold shutting down my body. Up until this point, I felt in control. I never felt like the hunter posed a threat to me. But then, an eerie chill crawled down my spine that wasn't caused by the cold. As we walked deeper into the woods, I had a troubling thought. What if Francis the Hunter wasn't as foolish as I thought him to be? Maybe I shouldn't have let my irrational anger get the better of me. Maybe I should have let him talk. What if he wasn't taking me to the Wendigo but leading the Wendigo to me? What was that ominous feeling looming in my chest? This felt like a trap. Francis was quiet for a while, but I couldn't tell who he was more afraid of, me or the Wendigo. I kept looking at my fingers, trying to shake off the numbness. I felt like my vampiric abilities were slowly leaving my body. Francis then looked at me as we walked, with guilt rotting his expression. "It's not my fault," he said softly. "I've made mistakes before, though it isn't the way you portray me to be." Francis then began removing the top layer of his clothing. He showed me the marks on his body, and I was horrified. "Have you ever seen something like this before, Inspector?" he asks. I didn't say anything. I was more worried if this hunter was leading me into a trap. His body had these bluish purplish blotches all over, like when a muscle tears and the skin has discoloration. It was more towards his chest and stomach areas. There were chunks of flesh missing from his body, like a dog's chew toy or a half-eaten cob of corn. Also, there were claw marks that were inside his body trying to get out. How the hell was he still alive, I had thought.
"Do you see, Inspector?"
he whispers to me. I wasn't afraid of the hunter, but in this moment, the way he acted and talked sent chills down my spine. Then he explained what had been going on.
I did feed on people before. Last winter was brutal. Resources were low. Tensions ran high in the camp. People began turning on each other and one thing led to another. If it wasn't me, then it would have been someone else. Of course, I regret it. Ever since then, the Wendigo has been following me, stalking me, preying on my sleepless nights, and haunting my nightmares when I do sleep. You think you know what's going on. You think those butchered limbs on the table were really my family.
What are you talking about? I had replied. This time, both he and I had stopped walking.
My family is safe and well, Inspector. I sent them away before those attacks took place. I wanted as many people to be alerted as possible, so you can find me and arrest me. I also wanted them to see the Wendigo in the flesh. Locked up in prison is the safest thing for me right now.
Look at these marks, he told me. For he was a vessel, though not by choice, and he lived in fear. One wrong move, one wrong expression, and the Wendigo would devour him. It's feeding on his soul, he said. That explained his voice sounding raspy and broken. The curse of cannibalism was like a plague being carried in the winter wind. The Wendigo didn't just need flesh, it needed desperation, vulnerability, always watching those in times of utter despair, waiting for them to turn on their own. This creature-like entity was a parasite, a disease, and it needed a host. It's always starving, and that's the paradox of its curse. The more it eats, the hungrier it gets. Francis said that he once saw the creature biting onto its own lips just to eat pieces from them. Then it coughed and fell to the ground, groaning in pain. Furthermore, the more it feeds on Francis from the inside out, he will become the creature. The entity will take over his body. Francis will grow arms longer than branches of the trees, and he will tower over the houses of the villagers. He will become so hungry and feed on so many until he finds a host of his own. While Francis spoke to me, I kept closing my eyes shut and opening them again. My body had begun failing me. I haven't had any blood since fighting the werewolves in Ravenpine Valley, and I could feel the strength leaving my body. Francis didn't have to tell me we were close. We reached an elevated part of the winter land, surrounded by cliffs and abrupt edges to our sides. I could feel the woods change, and it had nothing to do with the cold. Gradually, the trees fell silent. The wind felt like it refused to blow at that location. All I smelled was death and decay. The same stench at the crime scene, but now 100 times worse. Then, the most unexpected turn of events had occurred. Chief Inspector Detective Mills and Captain Langley were behind me. They shouted for me to let the suspect go, but Captain Langley was quieter than Mills, almost like he knew that I had a plan. I argued with Mills, trying to explain what I was trying to do. We yelled at each other and our frustration grew, but none of us were paying attention to Francis. None of us expected him to jump off the cliff. I ran towards the edge, hoping that I could catch him, but I heard his body splatter at the bottom. Once he fell, the woods returned to normal. The wind began blowing again and the stench disappeared. It seemed like the Wendigo knew its host has died, thus moving on from the location. No tracks to go on. No leads, no witnesses of the Wendigo's location. Nothing. I was so close in finding the Wendigo at that moment. Moles felt guilty and frustrated with herself, and I did too. I should have been transparent with my partners and not try to solve the case as a one-man army. Days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, and bodies began piling up. Same method of kill, same creature spotted, same winter haunting as usual. Until one night when the police force pinned one suspect to 3 of those attacks. And that's exactly what I was waiting for. This time, however, I wasn't going to do it alone. I walked into Langley's office and told him everything regarding the Wendigo, Swift Runner, the parasite-host relationship, cannibalism, the woods, and everything that happened to Francis. I wished it would have been as easy to tell him that I was a vampire, but there was still too much risk involved. He agreed to follow the suspect with me. Not to apprehend him, not to scare him, but to trail him. Winter was almost over, and this was our last shot. When Langley and I reached the woods, we moved as stealthily as possible. That was really impressive for someone as large as my captain. He towered over me. Unlike Detective Mills, who had a supernatural encounter before with a crimson lichen back when she was a little girl, Captain Langley had never seen anything creature-like or paranormal yet. We followed the suspect, a hunter as well, going by the name Hundley. He too walked without his shirt like Francis did, and the marks were on his body as well, though not as severely as Francis. The Wendigo had been feeding off him for the past few weeks, maybe even a month. Then, déjà vu. The woods turned silent. The air stole and the stench, heavier than it had ever been. We felt an ominous feeling in our chests, the type that makes your heart thump against the ribcage. And then, slowly but surely, we saw it. Where from and how it emerged was blinded from our sight. A 9-foot slender creature, ashen in color with antlers embedded into its skull. Indeed, like the witness reports, the creature-like entity was half human and half skeleton, but the human part was dying. Its lips chapped and torn from previously trying to eat it, just as Francis said. Its teeth were long and sharp and needle-like, while its large eyes were white as the snow. The Wendigo had long hair, strands that were too many but also too thin, dirty and untidy. The sound we heard from the creature, that deep growl we thought came from its throat, actually came from its stomach. Captain Langley stood frozen, his eyes opened wider than it had ever been. I saw the confusion, the doubt, the disbelief of whether what he was seeing was real or not. He didn't need to say anything for me to know. Gently, I placed my hand on his shoulder and whispered, "It's real, Captain." Hundley, the new hunter suspect and host to the Wendigo, bowed down to the creature out of fear, not respect. Yet another man fallen to cannibalism through desperation, greed, and gluttony. Yet another weak-minded individual for the Wendigo to manipulate. Hundley then opened a bag and toppled the contents over, butchered and dismembered limbs from people in his village. The Wendigo dove towards it, and that was the quickest we saw the creature move. For something starving, it was just as quick as I am. It scooped the remaining limbs in its large hands, munching on the flesh and slurping the blood. But now, how was I going to defeat it? How was I going to stop the disease of cannibalism spreading throughout Redwater? Captain Langley was with me. What if he got hurt? What if I had no choice but to reveal my vampire identity? In my time of pondering, the Wendigo left the hair, fingernails, toenails, and teeth just like before, and it still wasn't enough. Then we witnessed it firsthand. The bellow was louder than before. The Wendigo took a bite of Hundley, ripping a chunk of flesh clean off. He wailed in pain, and the Wendigo didn't devour further. It used its long fingers to gently caress the man's face. The bite was seen as a bonding, sealing, like marking one's territory. However, just as it walked away, Captain Langley fired a shot at the Wendigo. This pushed the creature forward, but its body reacted like the bark of a tree, crumbling without actually wounding the creature. Then I ran, charging forward, but not with vampiric speed. I tried fighting the Wendigo as a normal man, throwing my punches, weaving and dodging its claw swipes, but it was all catching up to me. Without any vampiric abilities in that moment, I was a sitting duck. Captain Langley then joined the fight, and he did extremely well for a human. But as the creature swiped me away, it swung its sharp claws at Captain Langley, removing a portion of flesh from his arm and shoulder. He groaned in pain, trying to stop the bleeding and gain distance from the Wendigo. I had to think fast. The wound sustained by Langley was bad, and he wouldn't survive without urgent medical attention. I had to make a choice. I couldn't let the creature-like entity escape again. I took a deep breath in and closed my eyes. Everything slowed down for a while. I could hear the captain's heartbeat racing. I heard the Wendigo's footsteps in the snow. I heard the frantic breaths of the wounded hunter. Then it was time. Then the winter woods darkened as I saw everything glow in crimson, like a veil of blood covering my eyes. My fingernails extended like claws, and I felt my fangs touch my lower lip. I revealed the monster that I was. I became vulnerable, ashamed. All those lies and excuses to cover up my curse was now thrown out in the open, waiting to either be understood or discarded. Then, with my vampiric speed, I charged at the Wendigo. I clawed the creature with my sharp fingernails, dodging and evading every attack it threw at me. It tried biting me a few times, some close calls, though I managed to deal with it. However, as the fight progressed, I realized that maybe that's not what I needed to do. I needed it to bite me. The Wendigo was a human-turned creature, and it seemed incredibly old, but the way it fought me, I had a feeling that it didn't know about vampires. So I stopped fighting. My punches became slower. My kicks became half-hearted, and the Wendigo bit a chunk of flesh right off my shoulder. I felt its needle-like teeth so deep it scratched my shoulder blade. I watched the creature chewing on a piece of me like I was the only meal it would have for winter. I've never seen greed or gluttony like that before. My wounds began healing, but I still never charged forward. Instead, I took a few steps back and waited. From greed and gluttony to immense pleasure of devouring flesh, the Wendigo's evil smile had slowly diminished. Then it began choking, coughing out dust and cold wind from its barren mouth. It groaned, long, slow, and painful, like the life from the vessel was draining. I remembered what Francis had told me. The Wendigo was so hungry that it once bit off its own lips and fell to the ground in pain afterwards. The same thing happened this time. The Wendigo had no idea I was the undead. Some said it fed on humans for as long as it could remember. Fresh blood and living meat, so to speak. But what about the flesh belonging to a vampire? What about my cursed blood flowing down its throat? For the first time, I was glad that I wasn't a human. The Wendigo's body began crumbling, like bark of an old tree shattering upon impact. First its stomach, then its chest, and then the antlers fell off and turned to dust. Its arms, like tree branches, began snapping and disintegrating, for the Wendigo had devoured flesh from an undead person. With a final shriek of agony and maybe betrayal, the Wendigo had exploded into dust right before my eyes. The winter woods had again returned to normal. No foul stench, no eerie whispers floating in the air, and no ominous heavy feelings looming in the wind. The haunting of winter was finally over. However, Captain Langley never said anything. When Detective Mills reached the location, she and I rushed him to the hospital, but still he never spoke. I could imagine it was a lot, knowing one of his own inspectors was a monster that he gets called to hunt every night. I was relieved the Wendigo had been destroyed and that winter, while still harsh and unforgiving, folk would have one less thing to worry about. Mr. Hundley, the new parasite host of the Wendigo, was arrested and sentenced. The relationship between host and parasite was still too early on in the feeding process, therefore Mr. Hundley would not become the next Wendigo. 1 week had passed and it was closer to Christmas. I saw people in villages and towns decorating their homes and trees with string lights, smiling, embracing each other and preparing for the season of love and togetherness. I put my head down and walked back home. What would a vampire know of love and togetherness? For me, on the other hand, I was always on duty in the night shifts. If anything, I was more alert during the festive period as I wanted folk to have a good Christmas. That night, when I tidied up my desk in the Redwater police station, I saw Captain Langley returning to his office. A strong man indeed. He greeted me on his way in and I awkwardly returned the gesture. Miss Ada was happy, Detective Moles was smiling, and Inspectors Julian and Felicia were having their regular banter. But I was terrified. It had been so long since I felt that way, where my nerves were taking control. I looked at folk walking outside and how happy they were, how accepted they were in the community. So I walked into Captain Langley's office that night, as petrified as I ever was, not for dealing with the most frightening monsters or creatures that lived in Redwater, but petrified for being accepted. Sometimes the truth can be scary. It's so easy speaking it, but one could never know on how well it's received. That's the fear, is it not? The unknown has frightened people from the time they have taken their first breath. But I didn't want to live in fear. So I told Captain Langley everything that night. I told him about my life as a locksmith before he was even born, my village that I lived in and how Dracula killed my people and I on that dark night. I told him about the monsters that live in Redwater, hiding in the shadows. It hurts me when I said that last part. A monster hiding in the shadows. Is that not what I am? Is that not what I have always been? My body trembled in that moment. I guess I knew that I would lose my job, but I didn't know how Langley would react, or if he would tell the other inspectors in the force. I just stood there, frozen with nerves, waiting for him to say something, to say anything. Yell at me, curse me, arrest me, whatever he needed to do. But he didn't. He just walked up to me with a sling across his shoulder, holding his hand in place, and then embraced me. For a cold-blooded creature like myself, that was the warmest hug I had received in a very long time. Then he walked back to his desk, giving me a nod, a smile, and said, "Well then, let's get back to work, shall we?" Tears filled my eyes as I wiped them away slowly, neatened my tie and said, "Yes, Captain," right away. That night I knew what acceptance felt like. I knew how it felt to throw yourself in the deep end and a hand reaches in to pull you out. I didn't feel like a monster. I didn't feel ashamed anymore. For in that moment, it wasn't just Captain Langley accepting me for who I was, but me embracing who I am. I guess the answer was always there in front of me, that if I wanted people to take me in and understand who I am, I needed to be comfortable with myself first. As a vampire, I may not have a wife or any children, and everyone I did know, my friends, were no longer on this earth. However, that tiny moment made me have the best Christmas that year, for in that moment, I felt like I belonged.